Thinking like a product manager is critical for being a good data engineer. And what does that look like? It looks like you build pipelines that actually impact the business, that actually change business decisions. And that can be in a couple different ways. One is you build good metrics that change business decision making. So learning how to develop good KPIs and good metrics is a very powerful way to do that. Another side of it is you build metrics that are impacted by experiments. So if you can learn how to do both of these things, build good KPIs and understand how experiments work and how to plug your metrics into experiments, you will become a much more impactful data engineer. And in this 2-hour course, we are going to be covering all of that. So I'm excited for you to check this out, and make sure to like, follow, and subscribe. So I think this is an important question. Why do metrics matter at all? It really depends on the company and all sorts of different things on like how much metrics matter and how much they actually impact things. I know, for example, like when I worked at Airbnb, for example, metrics mattered less there than at Facebook, for example. Like Facebook was a very, very, very data-driven company. They were all about that data. And I'm not saying Airbnb wasn't. I'm just saying that like a lot of times at Airbnb, they'd be like, well, the data is pointing this way, but we have a design kind of situation where we think this is a better design anyways. And so one of the things that can happen there is it really does depend on who the founder of the company is, of like how much metrics actually matter, because the founder is going to set the culture of the company. And if you look at the difference between Mark Zuckerberg and Brian Chesky, then it becomes very clear why there's a difference in the importance of metrics, where, you know, Zuckerberg, computer science guy, very like nerdy, you know, he's like, I am a robot, right? Zuckerberg gets that vibe, right? It's like if he didn't care about like metrics, that would be like very out of character for Zuckerberg, right? But then Brian Chesky's more of like a design guy. He's more of like an artsy fartsy guy. Like I feel like if Chesky didn't found Airbnb, he totally would have been like a starving artist type. And so like very, very different vibes from those guys. And then like, so how they lead can make a big difference. And so keeping that in mind when you're like working with metrics and working with things, like depending on the company, you might need to have another layer there. Where for example, at Airbnb, one of the big things was it wasn't just about like this metric went up, this metric went down. It was more like you needed to come up with a story behind it. Like, oh, like we made these changes and this happened. And then maybe it's like a 6-month arc or a 1-year arc. And you talk about like all the build up to these changes and these differences, as opposed to like at Facebook, you could just be like, this number went down and that's bad, or this number went up and that's good. Right. And that's where you can have, depending on the company, like how much they put in stock in metrics versus storytelling can tell you a lot about the company. But also metrics are important. Metrics provide visibility. Metrics, they explain the world, especially as you get more and more and more of them. The visibility that you get into your data is just better. So, and just into your business, because if you have different types of metrics that are measuring different types of things, you can make more clear decisions because you have more visibility into the business environment. And the more clarity and visibility you have, the fewer icebergs you're going to crash into, because you can see a little bit further into the future. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we kind of go into more metrics. But keeping in mind, metrics are very important. So what are we talking about today? Well, we have about 5 things that we're going to talk about. So you have metrics play a huge part in data modeling. In a lot of ways, they kind of inform data modeling. I'm sure if y'all finished the homework from week 3 on the spec, one of the things you'll notice is that a lot of the metrics that you defined in the spec and the aggregations that you were looking for really did inform what the data table should look like. And that's a big deal, because sometimes you can have really funky metrics that people really want, and they're just very hard to get, or they're very weird to like create a data table for. Especially like if you are getting, if you're getting beyond like simple aggregations and counts and stuff like that, it can get very interesting to get the right data model for that kind of stuff. Especially like if you're doing like ratios and denominators where you have A over B or A over B plus C or like any other, like anything that's more than just like a simple count or aggregation, metrics can get kind of funky. So also metrics, make sure metrics can't be gamed. We'll talk a little bit more in details there. I ran into a couple different cases where I've seen metrics be gamed in big tech companies, and how you can avoid that. There's definitely a lot of different examples there, because metric go up does not mean good. Like it's more complicated than that, and that's why you need to have some balancing that needs to be put in place. We're also going to be talking about the inner workings of experimentation. So how does an experiment work? How do you specify test and control? And we're also going to talk about the difference between feature gates and experimentation. Those are they are very related, but also different. So we'll talk a bit more about those. And then to wrap it up, we're going to talk about how to plug metrics into experimentation frameworks. So, for example, we're going to be using StatSig for the lab today. And in StatSig, you can put web loggers in your API and stuff like that. You can definitely do that with StatSig. But the problem is like you might need other metrics that are not easily logged. Like they might be more from like a database or more from like state or something like that need to be more like ETL'd. And we're going to talk more about how to get those metrics into your experimentation frameworks as well. So yeah, let's get into this. All right. So key thing here, when you're doing that spec, the spec stuff that we were talking about in week 3, and you're having back and forths with your stakeholders on what are the business metrics that you should be looking at, this is something that you should be considering at all times. Is if they are asking for something that's more than like a count or a sum or something that's, really just like a group by, like simple thing, like that's going to be mostly something that you should push back on. At least in my experience, like whenever the data scientist is like, hey, we need this funky rolling average sum percentile thing, generally speaking, as a data engineer, you should push back on that. That's like not your job. That should be their job. And you should just give them the raw aggregates and let the analytics people do whatever sort of analytics and numbers that they want on top of it. So key thing here, don't let the data scientists dictate your data models with extremely complex metrics to make you think like you have to add all these other crazy metrics into your data model. Because that's not the case. That's not the case, and nor should it be. That's just gonna it's gonna make your life miserable. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what are the types of metrics? So in the last slide I was talking about, there's aggregates and counts. Those metrics are great. There's also ratios. You can think of like percent of users in different countries. Talked about like compositions before in a previous lecture. You can also have ratio, which is like percent still active. If you remember from last week, we talked a lot about the retention metrics, right? Or it's like percent of users still active, like the survivorship bias and those numbers. Those ones are interesting, and like because that's going to be like you have A over B in those cases. And so those can be other metrics. Generally speaking, as a data engineer, you should only be supplying aggregates and counts. And what grain you supply those at is usually at like the entity grain. In like week 1 and 2, we talked about daily metrics where you have like user ID and then you have metric name and then you have the value of the metric. Those are going to be, generally speaking, the metrics that you're going to supply to data science. And if they're asking for ratios or they're asking for percentiles or they're asking for anything like that, like they're just trying to give their job to you, and that's not cool. I mean, I used to, like, as a data engineer, that was a big mistake that I made, was I felt like a very confident data engineer where I was like, I can do data science too, so I'll just do it because they asked me to, and I can do data science and data engineering, and I'm a freaking wizard. And for the most part, like I learned that one, you don't get recognition for that in your performance reviews for the most part, because your performance reviews are based on how well you do data engineering, not based on how well you do data science. So that is a big minus. And also, you're going to be asked a lot of weird statistical questions around the metrics that you supply that you probably don't want to answer because you aren't a data scientist and that's more their wheelhouse. And I don't know, like I'm fine with answering those questions because I have the statistical foundations to like do data science. But like I don't enjoy those questions. I don't It's not like I'm like, oh my god, like I just am so excited for you to ask about freaking whether or not this is like a normally distributed freaking metric, or like all the different things that can happen when they're talking about metrics and definitions and stuff like that. Like, so the key thing to remember is that if you define a metric, you should be able to answer any question about that metric. And so that's why you want to keep them simple, because that's not like data engineers aren't meant to be statistical wizards. It's not our job. I look at statistics as something that a data engineer needs to be like 2 out of 10 or maybe 3 out of 10 at to be successful on the job. So you don't have to be a crazy wizard at it. But this is the main idea. You have these 3 types of metrics, and we're going to talk more about like why we have these types of metrics, because they're all pretty useful. So aggregates and counts, they're the Swiss Army knife. You should be using these a lot as a data engineer. You can think of like the number, it's like counting events, like, fact data is a very common one, like the number of times someone's logged in, the number of friends someone has added, the number of notifications that someone has responded to. Like a lot of those are really powerful metrics, but also other ones are like more like they're like in the middle between like a metric and a dimension. Like is the user active? And like did they send any messages today? Did they like any posts today? So it's more like a daily active thing, like a 1 or a 0 kind of thing. And those can be very useful, especially when you have a skewed demographic. Like, for example, with notifications, if you make an extremely viral post, the number of notifications that you'll receive is a lot higher, like an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude higher than the average user. But if you have just the notification sent or notification received, yes or no, it doesn't matter if you went super viral or not, because whether you got 1 or a million, it doesn't matter. And we're counting people, not actions. And that's a big thing to remember here, is that there's the 2 different types, right? You can have metrics that are based on the number of people, and then you have also ones that are based on the number of actions. And those 2 different types of aggregates can be very, very important. And we're going to go more in depth into those different types of aggregates later in the lab and in this presentation. So keeping in mind, you're going to have a lot of aggregates here. Another thing to remember is you're going to want to bring in dimensions here as well. There will probably be some specific cuts that people care about. I know at Facebook they really cared about the young generation, trying to get them off of Snapchat and TikTok and getting them onto Facebook. Obviously, given the branding, that doesn't seem like they were very successful, but that was something that they definitely tried to do. And then you have other ones, like there's a big strong push to grow in places like India and Brazil and other countries, so there's probably a geographic dimension that you want to add. And sometimes when you run experiments, they can be statistically significant overall, but not statistically significant in some countries. So we'll go a little bit more into detail there as we kind of go through this presentation. But the key thing to remember about this slide is when you're working with metrics as a data engineer, you generally want to give your analytics partners simple metrics. Okay. Then you have ratios. Ratios are important. And they are something that mostly data scientists should work with, because like you don't want to have to be a data engineer and have to think about like the numerators and denominators and the inclusions and exclusions of different users in the numerators and the denominators of these functions. That's stuff that should be done by the data scientist, because they're going to be better at that like statistical knowledge than you are as a data engineer. Unless you're a super awesome data science, data engineer person, then I don't know, then maybe do both. But even then, I'm more of the opinion of having that be owned by the analytics people, just so that you aren't burdened. I mean, in my case, when I've owned metrics like this over my career, the problem that happens is that like I end up doing both roles and I'm like answering business questions about these metrics. And I'm like, why am I doing this? I want to just write Scala and do ETL and stuff like that. And then it's like, then I just do both and get kind of burnt out. Obviously, doing both is a good way to get impact, but we can talk about that more later. But anyways, these ratio metrics, you can think of like click-through rate, the number of people who saw your web page versus the number of people who sign up. You also have a purchase rate, the number of people who signed up to the number of people who gave you money. And then you also have things like cost to acquire a customer. Like you might spend, $1,000 on Google ads, and then that gives you 10 users, and then it's $100 a user to get to acquire a user. So you can think of like there's a bunch of different ratio metrics that you can have that like are very common. And ratio metrics, generally speaking, they measure not the like amount of something, but they usually measure the quality of something. Like the conversion rate is the quality of your web page. If you only convert 0.0001% of your users that visit your web page, it's probably terrible, right? But if you convert 100%, like which doesn't happen, but if you converted 100% of the users, that probably means that you had one traffic and it was you and you signed up and that was it, right? Because 100% also is like you should be skeptical. But generally speaking, a good conversion rate is like more than 3 or 4%. If you can get that many people to sign up, that's great. So that's kind of the idea behind ratio metrics. And these metrics are going to be they can also be cut by different dimensions. And this is where it's important to be careful, because what dimensions you cut by makes a difference in how you aggregate. Because if you have, for example, say you wanted to look at the number of unique users, or like so you're looking at like unique website user hits divide or like it's a conversion rate, but like the denominator is the number of unique users who visited, and the numerator is the number of unique users who were there, right? And then if you look at it if you break it out by, say, like device operating system, then the numbers aren't gonna necessarily add up to the right things, because those you can have someone who's on Android and iPhone at the same time. And so that's where you get this non-additive sort of thing, where it's like if you look at the conversion rate of all the operating systems and like try to average it out to the conversion rate, and you do like a weighted conversion rate of all the operating systems, it might not equal the overall because of this additive versus non-additive property of ratio metrics, and like of certain dimensions like operating system, like interface. There's a couple of them that are like that. We talked about that earlier in a previous lecture. But so ratio metrics are all about, indicating quality. Okay, so percentile metrics. Percentile metrics are very useful. So when I worked at Netflix, one of the things that I worked on was reliability of like uptime. One of the things we prided ourselves in at Netflix was we wanted to have 99.99% uptime. So there was only it was 25 minutes a year that you get where Netflix can be down. And we were trying our best to reach that, and we did a pretty good job. So let's talk about the differences here of okay, so if you had a metric that's called P99 latency, what that means is, okay, when our website loads for the slowest 1%, how fast is the website? So it's essentially it's asking like how fast is our worst experience. And so it's really important if you're trying to optimize the tails of your distribution and capture more audience and capture more share. I know that these types of metrics were also very, very important at Facebook. So one of the things when I was working at Facebook was there was a big push to go global, a big push to get people across the entire world. And one of the things that we realized was across the entire world, like not everyone had iPhones, not everyone had, or Samsung Galaxy S37s or whatever. Like they all had, like most people in the world, like their phones are kind of low budget. And one of the things that we realized looking at some of these latency metrics and some of these engagement metrics for people in these developing countries was that their phones couldn't handle Facebook, because Facebook was like either too data intensive, too RAM intensive, or like there was just so many different like things, like the hardware of their phones just couldn't handle it. So what these metrics helped leadership understand was that they needed to make another version of Facebook. And that's what they did. They made another version of Facebook called Facebook Lite that was it used, I think, like 20% the same amount of data as regular Facebook, and the install used, like, it was a 90% smaller install, and it also used a lot less RAM. It was also stripped down, obviously. It's funny because, like, I remember at least like Facebook Lite, when I was like using Facebook Lite for a while, I actually I shifted to using Facebook Lite for a while because it was like a worse experience, and I'm like, I'm already chronically on social media, and I want to like not be on social media so much, so I like to downgrade my experience to make it a little bit less addictive. But anyways, it's funny because like Facebook Lite back then really reminds me of like Threads now. I'm like, are they just making the same app again? Like what is going on with Facebook? But anyways, back to percentile metrics, like, because Facebook Lite was a massive success. Like, it got like hundreds of millions of users, and it was able to get that tail end of users who were not on good enough hardware to enjoy regular Facebook app. So you can look at the tail on that side, but you can also look at the tail on the other side of like, okay, P10 engagement of active users. So in this case, like, what are we doing for people who are like lurking on Facebook? The people who are like, they show up, they scroll the feed, but they never send any messages, they never like any posts, they just like scroll Facebook. And one of the things that there's been studies that show this, that like how you use social media makes a big difference on how it impacts your mental health. And for example, if you're like a lurker and all you do is passively consume, then it impacts your mental health a lot more than if you're a creator and engaging and being more social. Like, if you're more social on social media, it's not as negative to your mental health. So that's another great example of like, okay, what about if we're looking at the engagement metrics for those bottom like lurker people, like, what's going on with them, and like how can we make those metrics better? What experiments could we run to try to engage the least engaged people? So these metrics matter a lot because they are looking at the tails. This is where you're going to have a lot of your incremental impact, because of the fact that your average user, like for example, Facebook's average user, like, is not going to leave. They're just going to stay because of the fact that they are, nope, Lulu, come here. And they're just going to stay, and because like they're in the meaty part of the bell curve, and they're like, their needs are already being satisfied, and they already are having a pretty good experience. And so that's where you really do want to look at these kind of tail metrics, because that's where you're going to find people who you can actually make their experience better and actually help them come back and engage more. So that's how percentile metrics work. As a data engineer, like, you should probably not be passing these metrics to your data scientist. You should be passing them the daily aggregates, and then the data scientist people can do their percentile magic and stuff like that on the data on top of that. They can plug it into their experimentation frameworks, all that jazz. Okay, shifting gears here a little bit. So metrics can be gamed, especially with experimentation. So experiments can move metrics up short term, but down long term. I remember one of the things that happened when I first worked at Facebook. There was an experiment that ran that was like, what happens if we 10x the notification volume in a small subset of the Facebook users? And then they noticed, like, oh wow, if we 10x the volume of notifications, we get more growth. And they called it like blasts, like notification blasts. And then they were like, wow, we should probably do this more often. And I'm sure a lot of y'all on this call are like, no, please don't. Like, please, I will turn you off. I will silence you. Don't do it. And so, like, and that could be a big thing that can happen, where you can do these short-term like gimmicks and games and all sorts of things that can still like make your numbers and make your metrics go up because of like some sort of like short term for some short term reason, but then it's not like helping you look at the long term. So the big one for me, right, was in notifications. You send more, you get more users in the short term. In the long term, you lose that handle, you lose that lever, because what happens is more people turn off settings, and then you can't access those users anymore. So what you need to do is you need to create other metrics that can help you figure this stuff out. Like for example, like in notifications, I created the metric called reachability, which was the percent of users that we can send a notification to. So then when they run experiments where they blast all these users, they can see that it's actually like detrimental. So that made it so that like, and then we had a rule in notifications after that metric came online, where the only experiments that got shipped were experiments that increased growth and either were neutral or increased reachability. They had to have both of them going up. Otherwise, like it was going to be an experiment that was considered not successful. So that's a great point when I was talking about earlier, like why do metrics matter? In those cases, like it makes it so that you're not flying in the dark, where you're like, wow, like you see now we can see that we're making notifications better, increasing growth, and they're more relevant because fewer people are turning off their settings. So then you can actually get like a win-win. You can set up your experiments to be win-win, not just like gimmicks and games. And so other things you can do, right, with metrics, right, is you can fiddle with stuff. You can fiddle with the numerator or the denominator, where it's like, oh, what metrics are you looking at? For example, like you could say, like I know a lot of them was like engagement per daily active user or engagement per monthly active user, and you can look at these different kind of cross sections of different users. And I always thought it was interesting because like that was one of our goals when I was working there. Is I worked a little bit more on like email and SMS notifications, which are used more to bring people back on like a monthly basis than on a daily basis for Facebook. And so it's like, okay, but if we look at the engagement per daily active user, then the metric, the experiment might look like a success. But that wasn't our goal to begin with, because we're trying to boost the engagement of monthly active users, where the effect might be more diminished because of which people are in which populations. And so you can fiddle with the numerator and denominator of your metrics, and like you can essentially like get experiments to tell you whatever you want. So that's where you want to be very careful with doing stuff like that and not going too deep into like fiddling with stuff, and like really having clear hypotheses when you are on the outs, or like when you're starting your experiment, and that you can test those specifically and look at those metrics specifically, so that you aren't like trying to I don't know if y'all have ever heard of p hacking. P hacking is a great term that I recommend y'all look up. And it's essentially a way to make experiments kind of show significance in whichever way you want them to show significance or not. And so then other things, you have novelty effects. So for example, if you introduce a new feature or you introduce new things, then users will, generally speaking, they're going to be excited by this difference. If you add a new tab, you freaking change your notifications. I know this was an interesting one that I saw, was like, if you added an emoji to notifications, there was like this at the beginning of the experiment, there was this massive lift. It was like a 15 or 20% lift in notification conversion rate if you added an emoji. And people were like, in the notification team, like that first week, we thought we had like we were all gonna get promoted, and like, oh my god, like we just struck gold. We just had to put a freaking smiley face in the notification, and who would have thought, right? Oh my god, right? But then like as the experiment kept running, we noticed that the lift that we saw at the beginning ended up starting to die down as the novelty of the new feature wore off. So, and emojis were not the slam dunk to notification conversion that we thought they were. And so that can happen though. And that's why like you need to be aware when you're running experiments for how long your experiment should run. Um, another example I had was when I was working at Netflix. They were doing these feed refreshes where they were trying to see like if we refresh the movie feed uh, in the background while someone's not using the app and we do a background refresh, does it increase retention because then the movie feed is as fresh as possible? And they tested it out like at different intervals. Like, do we refresh every 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, right? Different like intervals. And they noticed like the more often they refreshed, the more retention they got, which was great. But like, what about the downside of that? Like, if you're only caring about retention, then like obviously you would pick the most frequently refreshing experience. But then it's like if that adds millions and millions of dollars to your AWS bill because you're just causing all sorts of additional requests, then that might not be the right play. So another thing to think about. That's why you need counter metrics, and that's what I did at Netflix. Was I added another counter metric, which was the AWS cost of an A/B test. So then they could look and they could see like then they could balance it out. They can then do an ROI analysis of like we get this much increased retention at this cost. Because a lot of times, like you get this thing called diminishing returns, where like you do get a little bit more value as like you keep increasing that refresh, but it costs substantially more for every interval. At some point, you get this like nice little parabola effect, and so a logistic effect where you hit that kind of like carrying capacity where you have to increase the cost a lot more to get a smaller and smaller benefit. So metrics can be gamed. We're going to talk a lot more about this on Wednesday as well. Okay, so now we're going to kind of go back to the fundamentals here of like how does an experiment work? So there's really 4 pieces to an experiment. This is very similar to the scientific method, if y'all remember that from school. Your first step is make a hypothesis. Then you want to do group assignment. You can think of that as like test control. You might have multiple test groups. There could be 2 or 3 or 4 test groups as well. And then you want to collect data. And then you want to look at the differences between the groups. So that's going to be the main things. And we're going to go over each one of these in detail so that y'all can be ready when you are making your own experiments. Okay, so hypothesis testing. The null hypothesis testing is where you have what's called the null hypothesis, and then you have the alternative hypothesis. And the null hypothesis is always the same, which essentially says there is no difference between test and control. There's no statistical difference. Like making this change will have no statistical difference. And the alternative hypothesis is there is a significant difference from the changes that you introduce, like the test and control cells. So those are the 2 types of ways that are 2 hypotheses. And these are like, you can see how these are like only one can be accepted, and so let's go into a little bit more details around this because this is an important kind of nuance. So you never prove the alternative hypothesis, right? So in this case, you reject or fail to reject the null. So in the case when there isn't a statistical difference, you fail to reject the null hypothesis, which says that there is none. But if there is a statistically significant difference, you reject the null hypothesis because your alternative hypothesis might not be right. Because it might have more details and like what you think is like the reasoning behind it. And it's similar in science how like, you have like hypotheses and then you have like theorems, and you only really get to that proof level when you have like a massive body of work, right? And so you don't really prove hypotheses, you just support them. And that's going to be a key thing to remember here because of the fact that you can have all sorts of other things that could be going on. So you want to always be that kind of like hesitant, kind of hand-wavy data scientist in that case. Okay, so group testing. This is an important point. This is essentially how we assign test and control or to our group members, and in this case, our group members are our users. And then we got to ask a bunch of questions. So one of the big questions to ask is, are these users in a long-term holdout? Like, for example, at Facebook, when I worked in notifications, they had this thing called long-term holdouts, which is they wanted to measure the effectiveness of notifications as a product. And the way they did that was they took a small percentage of Facebook users who we just never sent them notifications, ever. They got no notifications. It's like a small percentage of users get nothing. And the reason why we do that is that we can compare the growth of that group to the growth of everybody else. And then we can see the impact that notification has on a percentage basis. And that like incremental growth, comparing those two groups, was a very critical metric for Facebook. But with that being said, if the user's in a long-term holdout and I'm doing a notification experiment, that user is not eligible for that experiment because they can't get notifications. So you can have these long-term holdouts that are very important because they're like long-running experiments. And you want long-term holdouts because they measure the effectiveness of various parts of your application and the health of those parts of the application. Because you'll have users who don't have that feature, and then you can see like, oh, are these users like how many more users are we getting back because of this feature? And that could be huge as well. And so like make sure that like that's the first thing you want to test is like, are they in a long-term holdout? Another thing to test is like, you might be doing an experiment that is geographic. So maybe I'm doing like a sale in the US, and then it's like, okay, are my users in India eligible? No, because it's a sale in the US. So like a lot of times your experiment groups are not 100% of your users. It can be some fraction of your users based on different criteria that you have for them. Another one might be like, oh, I want to do an experiment on Chrome to see if these users have this bookmark installed or to have this thing installed on, or like an extension installed or different things like that. Like, and then your population is just people who use Chrome, not everybody. So you can have experiments that have all sorts of different like criteria to be involved in. And we're going to go over how to set some of that stuff up in StatSig today in the lab. And then another one is like, what percentage of users do you want to experiment on? Because another thing is like, what if your experiment sucks? What if your experiment has a lot of downside to it? You don't know. And that's where it's like, if you're a big company like Facebook and Google, like you can actually really limit the downsized impact, where it's like you might start with like 1% of users or 0.5% of users. And then if the experiment shows promise, then you open it up to a wider number of users to see like how the power and like the statistical trends, that they'll probably stay the same because you have a strong enough statistical sample, but they could shift as well. So that's where like, what percent of users do you want to experiment on? For my experiments that I'm running on my website, I just do 100% because I don't have 10 trillion users like Facebook and Google. So for me to get enough statistical power out of my tests and out of my experiments, I need pretty much every user I can get. So that's where it's important to look at what the differences are there and like how big tech versus a smaller company is going to do experiments. And a big one here is going to be the percent allocation, because big tech gets that luxury where they can experiment on a smaller percentage of users and see what happens before they open it up to everybody else. Whereas at a smaller company, if you did that, you're going to get like 2 users and it's like, okay, you don't have enough statistical power to prove that there was an impact or not. So you want to make sure that your tests are powered. We're going to talk more about that in another slide here. Okay, so let's talk about group assignment. So there's 2 ways that you can be essentially assigned to a group in an experiment. The first question is, are you logged in? And if you're logged in, you can have a logged in experience, and your user ID for your app will be the identifier for that user. And logged in experiments are more powerful than logged out ones in some regards because of the fact that you have a lot more information on your logged in users, right? Like, for example, pretty much everyone in this call filled out that intake form. So I know all like the time zone that y'all are all in. I know all sorts of different things about y'all, right? And so if I run experiments on exactly.com that are logged in experiments, I can use that and assign groups and bring in more data and richer data about y'all because I have so many more like dimensions and different things on like how y'all interact with my website. But on the flip side, like you also probably want to do logged out experiments to see how people convert so that you can get customers. And usually speaking, if you're going to be doing a logged out experiment, you're going to want to use one of two identifiers. Like you can either use an IP identifier, but you want to hash it. If you hash your IP identifier, then that will be a way to get someone to kind of have a stable identification. The problem there, though, is like if someone's on, like they're visiting your website and they're on mobile and then they go from mobile to Wi-Fi back to mobile, then that's going to be treated as two different users, even though it was one user. That's where StatSig is pretty cool. They have this other thing called a stable device ID, which is going to be a more consistent way to hold on to users that you can also use. They have their different trade-offs and benefits, right? And the stable device ID can also be pretty powerful as well. So, and also know that like if you use IP, another thing that can happen is if you have two people on the same Wi-Fi that are visiting a certain website, they're going to be the same user. So you also get you can have one user become two, but you can also have two users become one. And so you can actually have both experiences happen, like if you use just IP. And so that's where you can, that being said, IP is also very simple to use. And actually in the lab, that's what we're going to be using. So what happens is you pass your identifiers to StatSig. StatSig will then say, okay, server, send the blue environment or the red environment. So you can think of like the different colors as different experiences that users can get. And StatSig will essentially tell the server that, and then the server will send to the client the changed view, like whether it's a blue button or a red button, or you say like Data Engineering Academy versus Data Engineering Course, or different things like that, and you change the words up, so then you can measure the impact of your experiments over the long term. And another big important thing that you have to do is you need to track your events. So if I send a client with a blue button, I need to track all the events, like so that I know that they got the blue button and then they signed up and then they bought from me, right? I have the whole funnel of events that they did. And so those events can happen either on the client or on the server, depending on where you want to do your logging. And StatSig offers APIs for both, right? You can have you can do client-side event tracking or server-side. For the lab today, we're going to do all server-side because it's simpler. So this is kind of the idea behind how to run experiments. There is one piece in here that is missing, and that is, what about other metrics that aren't logged on StatSig, but you want to add? Like, for example, you might have a user pipeline that you want to add a bunch of other extra dimensions to. So you can imagine like a separate ETL process that dumps into StatSig as well, that gives you like user level dimensions and metrics as well that you can also add. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end of this presentation. Okay, so that's the idea behind group assignment. That's how they get into test to control. It's based on those identifiers. Then you collect data. You collect data for a while until you get a statistically significant result. Generally speaking, in big tech, that meant you waited at least a month. So you ran your experiment for a month to see what was going to happen. So, and what I was saying in the previous slide, you want to use stable identifiers, whether that be your IP address or a stable ID in StatSig. And then there's also you can also use your user ID, like your logged in user ID, if you're doing a logged in experiment. We're going to be doing a logged out experiment in the lab today because setting up logged in would be just a lot of work. So collect a lot of data until you get a statistically significant result. But keeping in mind, you might not, especially if you're looking for either a very high level of significance or the change is very nuanced and there actually isn't a statistically significant result. Generally speaking, the longer you collect data, the more likely you're going to get a statistically significant result. Okay, so how it works, right, is the smaller the effect, the longer you're going to have to wait. So if there's a big change and like one version of your test is just dramatically better than other versions, then great, awesome, and then you'll get your statistically significant result very quickly, and that could be it can be a good feeling too, because then you're like, oh, awesome, like my hypothesis was correct and I got my data really quickly, and that can oftentimes be a sign that you have like a slam dunk experiment. And on the flip side, like if it's been a month and you still don't have a statistically significant result, it might not ever be, right? Or the effect might be so small that like it doesn't matter. So keep that in mind when you're like collecting data. Another big thing, do not underpower your experiments. So today we're going to be talking about how to have multiple test cells. So you can have test cells 1, 2, and 3, and then your control cell. You can have different test cells. And the problem is, like, if you have too many test cells, then you're going to run into problems because you're going to have underpowered. Because imagine if you had 10 test cells, then that means that like each cell is only going to get like 10% of the data. And if each cell only gets 10% of the data, then in order to get enough data to measure if there's a statistically significant result is very high. And you don't want to do that because if you're working in a startup, you definitely don't want to do that because you don't have enough data. Google is a little bit different, right? They ran an experiment where they tested 41 different shades of blue, and they were able to send like 2.5% of the traffic to each shade of blue, and then they were able to get enough data back on that, and they didn't have to wait a million years. And the reason why they didn't have to wait a million years is because they just have an insane amount of data at their disposal, and they can do a lot more experiments. That's one of the things that's beautiful about having a lot of data, is that you can run experiments a lot quicker because you have like just more incoming input from people. And remember this is critical, is that like before you start your experiment, you want to make sure that you have logging set up for all of your events and dimensions you want to measure, so that you can check, and like you don't have to be like, oh, halfway through the experiment be like, oh man, we forgot to log this other metric, and then because then like, you're gonna miss out on a lot, and then it's gonna mess up the differences, because like you're gonna have like a skewed experiment where half the people were in the experiment and you didn't log the metric, and then the other half you logged it halfway through, and it's a problem. So that's a big important thing to remember before launching experiments, is make sure you have all your logging in place. Okay, now we're getting to the cool parts of this. So you want to look at the data, and here's an example of an experiment that I'm running on my website on exactly.com. And when you're running an experiment, you're gonna look and you're gonna get charts like this that are different metrics, and you can see like the statistical significance, like kind of day over day, or like the different. This is not day over day. This is just like comparing test and control. So in this experiment, I'm doing red versus blue buttons, and you'll see if there's a bar that overlaps 0, so if you have negative and positive options, then it's not a statistically significant result. So the only metric that actually makes a difference here is whether or not someone visits the sign up page. And you'll see that, I mean, there's not a lot of data here yet, and that's why these the error bars are so freaking huge. So you'll see in this case, the impact here is 21% plus or minus 20%. So that means that like the red versus blue button could impact signups between 1% and 41%. That's like the range of like what could possibly be here. Keeping in mind that I've only been running this experiment for 2 days, and the confidence interval, right? You see the confidence interval here is only 80%, which is a pretty weak confidence interval. That's not the industry standard in data science. I was like, so technically, like if you use industry standard, this experiment shows that like whether I use a red button or a blue button, there's no statistically significant difference. So let me show you that like as we talk more about p-values. So in this case, the p-value would be 0.2, which is a very high p-value. That's what we want to look at. So p-values. So generally speaking, p-values are the standard one is 0.05. So what that says is there's a 90, like if the p-value is less than 0.05, that means that there's a 95% chance that the effect that we're looking at is not due to chance and is due to some other factor, right? And it's not due to randomness. And so in the last slide, you see when it's like this 80% confidence interval, that means that for this metric, this visited sign up, the one that's statistically significant down here, that means that there's an 80% chance that this is not random, but a 20% chance that it is random. So keeping that in mind when you're like looking at confidence intervals. And the lower the p-value, the higher certainty you have that the randomness is it's not due to randomness, but due to some sort of underlying change. So p-values are very important. If you haven't looked at them, I highly recommend looking into them. They're a statistical tool that are used to pick out change, and they're one of the most important things when running an experiment to determine whether or not we can say that there was an actual change or not. Okay. But just because something is statistically significant doesn't mean that it's valuable. And one of the reasons that is the case is the statistically significant change might be tiny. Like, for example, in that last slide, you saw how like I was like, oh, there might be a 1% lift if I use a red button instead of a blue button. And it's like, if it's like a 1% lift, is that even like, I mean, it's valuable, but like, what if it's like a 0.001% lift? Then it's like, okay, that's essentially the same. Even though there is a statistically significant difference, it's the same. And that can happen, especially for experiments that are running for a long time, because as you collect more and more data, more and more metrics, the differences in them will become statistically significant. But the deltas might be tiny. And if they're tiny, like they're probably worthless. So that's a key thing to remember about statistical significance. Okay, so I want to talk about some other important gotchas with statistical significance. If you have test and control, here's an example for you. Like, so say you're measuring notifications received, and like that's the metrics you're looking at in your experiment. And in the test group, you have a bunch of average people, and then in the control group, you have like Beyonce, and you have Justin Bieber, and then a bunch of average people. If you look at notifications received, Beyonce and Bieber are probably gonna have a few more notifications than everybody else, and that's gonna really skew the average up a lot. Where it's kind of like how, in a room of me and Warren Buffett, the average between us is a billionaire. Even though I'm pulling him down a lot, he just has so much money that it doesn't matter. And so it's the same idea here, where if you have extreme outliers, you want to be careful. And one of the things you can do is it's a technique called Windsorization. So if the outliers are so extreme, what you can do is you can clip them to a less extreme value. And generally speaking, that's like the 99.9th percentile is what you want. That's what the standard kind of Windsorization is. So that like if you have like just very, very extreme outliers, that will make it so that you don't have as much skew. But another thing you can do is, instead of looking at event counts, look at user counts, because that can but it depends on like what you're trying to measure. But like a lot of times user counts is going to give you a better view, because in that case it's like, okay, Bieber and Beyonce both received a notification, so they count as one, and I received a notification, so I'm at the same level as Bieber and Beyonce, right? So anyways, that's kind of the idea when you're looking at statistical significance. Remember that skew can cause problems. Windsorization is often built into different experimentation platforms to help avoid this problem, but it is a technique that you should be aware of. Okay, we're getting real close. So StatSig can create metrics. We're gonna go over how they're logged and all sorts of things in the lab today. And how about adding your own? So this is a very common problem, and this is a big problem that I did at Facebook. Was like, as a data engineer, you often are gonna be adding new metrics into experimentation platforms so that data scientists can look at how they change via experimentation. And so that's a big thing to remember as like you're building stuff out, is that like a lot of these daily metrics and daily dimensions or slowly changing dimensions are going to be added into your experimentation platform so that data scientists can go nuts to see like if there's like any dimensional impact on an experiment, or like if this metric is important, or what counter metrics you need. So very common thing. I've done this at literally every company I've worked for in big tech.
Congrats on getting to the end of the day one lecture. If you're taking this class for credit, make sure to switch to the other tab so that you get credit for it. Excited for you to check out the lab.
What I want you to do is make sure you're on the latest version of the code base. Pull from main. If you're not, you're going to need to set this statsig API key environment variable if you have not done that. I can show y'all how to do that if you later on. Hopefully I'll have some experience with setting an environment variable. But so Flask is a way of building out a web server. So what I want to do is first I want to show y'all how to set this up. So let me open terminal real quick. Okay. Okay, so I want to be in here, and the whole idea here is if you do Python and then you do source server.py, this is going to set up. You see how it says running on this domain? If you go to that domain, you'll see like, hello, this is a Flask API. So that's essentially this is like the hello world sort of web server. And what you can do is, what I want to show you though is if I go to tasks, right, you'll see that I'm like, okay, it's saying experiment group green, and then it's saying odd tasks for blue and green, even for red and orange. So that's probably wild, right? And you'll see like I have a user identifier here. So this is all based on configurations from statsig, and this is an experiment I'm doing called like button colors or something like that. And we're going to go over in more details how this works from statsig. But let's kind of like walk through that code real quick first. So you'll see here we have this app.route. It's on line 33 here. This tasks route, which is going to be what supplies this this link for this web server. And then you'll see we essentially are trying to figure out the way to get the hash string. So you'll see one of the hash strings, the initial hash string is based on the remote adder. So this is going to be like your IP address, essentially. And then this is essentially saying we can also specify random. And what random does is it will change our user ID. So if I say $random equals true, then I will be assigned like a different group. Right, you see how like that's probably kind of nuts, right? You see how like, because now that my user ID is essentially set at random, and I'm not my logged out user ID is just a random number now, and so I'll get assigned a random group, right? But you see, if I don't put random, my IP address, I always consistently get green, and that's like kind of what you would expect. So let's kind of go over how to build out this experiment. And I'm going to essentially make another version of this experiment so that y'all can go ahead and start with me. Okay, so this is, you see, if you made your account on statsig, this is kind of like the statsig API, or like the statsig UI. That is pretty cool. If we go in, and you'll see over here on the left, there's like a bunch of different options here. There's like feature gates, experiments, metrics, all sorts of really cool stuff here. I'm very happy that I integrated with statsig. But so if I go to experiments, I'm going to show you first the experiment that I made, and then I'm going to create a new one to show you how to make your own. So you'll see in experiments here, we have button color V2. And it's saying we're refreshing your pulse results. Okay, whatever. It's like taken a million years. So you'll see we have so this is the experiment. So as you see this button color V2, the name here. If you go look in the code base here, you see this like line 40 here. You see this like statsig.get experiment, and then I pass it a statsig user, and then I pass it button color V2, and then I want to get the attribute button color. And then this is like the default value if for some reason the user can't be put into an experiment. So let's go to setup real quick, because I think that is probably a little bit confusing. Okay, so what we are looking at here is initially this is how it works, right? So you want to, but you can't edit any of the parameters, okay? Because once you start an experiment, you can't edit any of these things. It's like set essentially. So here's how it works, right? Remember how I was talking about like, okay, what percent of users are going to be allocated to this experiment? And then I say, okay, 100%. So we're saying, and then it's like 100% of what users? So you can say like 100% of Chrome users, 100% of Android users, 100% of all users, right? And then you have to split. You can, and this is your split between all your groups. And in this case, I have 4 groups. I have control is blue. You have test is red, or test 1 is red, test 2 is green, and test 3 is orange. So those are the 3 tests and groups, and this is essentially how this experiment works. And this will essentially go ahead and collect data, and we'll have data here in this like pulse results. Some of this stuff we won't actually end up doing because this is like a local web server, and we can't collect as much data. But that's the whole point here. As data engineers, my whole point here is I'm trying to teach y'all how experimentation works underneath the hood so that you can like have a better appreciation for how things get split up. So if we go back to the experiments tab here, and what we want to do is we want to hit create. We want to hit this blue create button. And I'm going to call this button color, let's go call this button color V3. And then I'm going to say, I think the red button is the best one. All right. And then this is where, remember I was talking about like you can either use user ID or stable ID. You can use either one here. I would say user ID because if you pick stable ID, the problem is like since it's local, you're only going to get assigned one group and then you're done. Like, and that's all that there's nothing else you can do about it. But if you pick stable ID, then that's what's and normally that's fine because like if you're a different user, you'll be on a different device in a different location. But like for us, we want to have control over the user IDs. So we're going to hit create. Awesome. So now we have our kind of experiment kind of set up. One of the other things you need to do is you want to think about the metrics that you could potentially be looking at, right? And so these are like there's a bunch of metrics that Statsig gives you for free, like daily active users, L14, L28. All these are like very kind of baked into the platform. You'll see some of these, like I have like user confirmed successful and sign up successful and visited sign up. These are custom events that I added into Statsig, and I'm going to show you how we're going to log our own events as well. So in this case, what I want to look at is I want to look mostly at daily active users. So you have to pick a metric here. So what I'm saying is like, I don't know, I think that the red button is the best one. And then, you know, the null hypothesis in this case is that color doesn't impact things. So then if we go down here, you'll see we have our, originally it breaks it out into, see how it breaks it out into groups. And then we have test and control. And what I want to do is I want to add a parameter here. And we're going to call this button color. We're going to add. So then control, we're going to say is blue. And test, we're going to say is red. And say we want more groups. You can click this plus over here. And then I can say green. And I can hit plus again. And I can say orange. And so now we have essentially an experiment that's going to run that is an even split 25, 25, 25, 25 between blue, red, green, and orange. and we can see how that impacts our metrics. The metric that we are caring about is daily active users. Obviously, let's throw in another metric here. Let's do visited sign up. Let's add that metric as well. And so this is pretty much ready. So what you want to do next here is you want to hit save. Always remember save. Like save always messes me up. So now, since we have defined our hypothesis, right? We have our primary metrics we're looking to track. We have defined our groups, and we can keep in mind each group can have its own parameters, right? I might add like maybe I can add like paragraph text, right? And then I can be like data engineering boot camp, and then here I can be like data engineering self-paced course, and here I can be like data engineering academy, and here I can be like, then I could also put like DE boot camp, and because maybe people don't like to read all of it and they like the abbreviations, but like you can see you can add whatever other parameters you want to each version of this, so that like you can imagine that I could swap out different titles with this or different paragraphs of things this way. So I'm going to hit save here before we hit start. So okay, so now we have our experiment is essentially ready to go. The only other thing we need to do here is we want to hit start, and then it's going to yell at us because you haven't tested your experiment in a non-production environment yet. And obviously you can do that if you want to test stuff. I'm just going to hit launch though. It's fine. Okay, so we have launched. Great. And so now what we want to do is let's go back into PyCharm, and on line 40 here, we can change button color V2, change this to button color V3, right? And then I also want to get the paragraph text or the title text. We'll call this title text. No, it's called paragraph text, right? That's what I called it in the paragraph text. And then this is paragraph text. And then in here, I'm just going to say data engineering bootcamp. And so now I have my paragraph text, and I want to add this paragraph text just as another HTML element here. I'm going to put it here, paragraph text. I don't know if y'all have ever written some HTML. Just saying, in the lab or in the homework for this week, y'all are going to be doing some of this stuff. So you'll see I switched to button color V3. And I have my data engineering bootcamp as my, this is essentially the default. If for some reason StatSig can't put a user into a group, it will just use that paragraph text. So now if we go back here and we refresh, so you see now it's saying data engineering self-paced course, right? But I'm going to be forever in red because of this is my user identifier, and now I'm in red forever. But obviously, if you throw on random equals true, you can see how this will essentially swap like whatever group I'm in. And so this is kind of the idea behind how this stuff works, is you have different groups, and this assigns, and then you have a different experience depending on the user that you are and the user that is kind of working with this stuff. So how does this okay, cool. Y'all are probably like, wow, Zach, you made different colorful images show up in the lab today. But it's like, how does this make any difference in experiments? Well, on one side, we now are tracking daily active users. So we will know whether or not someone's daily active just based on whether or not they hit this URL. And then that's automatically logged in StatSig. But we need more, right? We need to see like, okay, if they go here, do they actually visit another page? So you saw how we had that, we're tracking that other metric. You see this visited sign up? We probably want to track that metric as well. So that's going to be the next thing that we want to do, is we're going to add another metric into this, another event, so that we can track that. And we can see what happens as things kind of progress as we're adding more metrics and more engagement to this. If we go back to PyCharm, one of the things is what we want to do is you'll see there's a bunch of different routes and stuff for this API. And you see this like hello world route. So you want to essentially copy lines 28 to 30 and then paste it again. And then what you want to change here is this backslash, make it backslash sign up. So now this is going to be, and then you want to change the string in here to be like, this is the sign up page. So, oh yeah, sign up page. We'll put it all one word there. So now what this is going to do is this is going to give us another web page on our server that we can look at. So if we go here and then we essentially go to, instead of backslash tasks, we go to backslash sign up. You can't have, you got to change this from hello to sign up. That's why, because we have two functions with the same name. So now Flask won't be mad at us. Okay, so now it's working in Safari, and I'm going to put that sign up route back because it was right. So now, for some reason, it wasn't working. But now if we put sign up here, see, now this is the sign up page. Great. But we probably want to put a route in the other page as well. So, I don't know if y'all have ever done like, so in this get tasks function, you'll see this ends up rendering a lot of like HTML. What I want you to do is at the bottom here, we're just going to say, we're going to make an A tag, and you want to use an href here. If y'all have worked with HTML, we're just going to say inside here, we're going to say go to sign up. And then in the href here, we're going to just put backslash sign up. And I'll show why we want to do this. So that we can kind of have a better time here. So let's go back to tasks. Okay. So you see, wow, blue is really hard to read. Okay. But like, you see down here, this says like, you see this, like, there's this go to sign up page that you can click, and this links back over to the sign up page, kind of the basic sign up page. So this is kind of the idea, right? Okay, green is way easier to read. So then we can say go to sign up. Great. Now we are at this new sign up page. And so we want this action to be logged so that we can see, like, okay, if people go to this tasks page, how many of them click on this link and actually follow up? So that's going to be our first thing that we want to do. And the way that you do that is with, so statsig has another, so we say like statsig, then we got like, there's like log event. And then in this case, we have visited sign up. And, but we need to get our statsig user. So in this case, our statsig user is going to be based on, like, it's going to be based on the same sort of randomness, or it's going to be based on the same user ID from all of this stuff. So if you copy the lines, 41 to 45 here, this will give us our user ID. That's going to be the hash. And then we have our statsig user. Statsig user is going to be statsig user ID. So now this will be our logged statsig user. And then you just have to pass them in here as kind of a, that's right, I'm pretty sure. Like, so, and then that will log the event for that specific statsig user. So what we want to do is go back up to the server here, and we need to import that. So we can say from statsig event import statsig event. Oh, that's so lame. That's the way that you have to do it. So in this case, then we're going to have a statsig event. In this case, that's going to be a new statsig event. And then inside here, there's going to be a user, and that's going to be a statsig user. And then we have a event name, and that's going to be visited sign up. And then and then you pass it in all together like that. That's what it's expecting. So this is going to be our kind of way that we're going to be adding more code into the sign up page, and this will give us our event logging that we're looking for. So now I'm pretty sure if I like hit sign up again, there we go. So now we're actually getting like actual event logging here that you would expect. So this is now, we have our sign up page, and then we have our tasks page. right? Because we go to tasks, okay, we're in the orange group. You go to sign up, boom. And then, so now that is going to be a logged event. So we should be able to see that actually. If we go to button color v3, you'll be able to go to like diagnostics. Okay, there we go. So you'll see in StatSig, we have, these are going to be all of the exposures of different users, right? And you'll see a lot of them were like those random users that I was implementing before with that question random equals true. So these are going to be all these users that were exposed to our different kind of logging or to our different tests, right? So you see like, okay, this user got test 2, this one got control, this one got test. So you can get all sorts of different rules and splits that for users, and you can see exactly how they're going to come in this way. And then if you go to the metrics tab, one of the things that you should see here is, this is going to also have all of like my website's metrics in it too, right? Yeah. Okay, it's not going to be there. Is there one in here that's going to work? Does this have like metric lift at all? Okay, I forget. StatSig does take a little bit of time before you can actually see any of the actual metrics involved with stuff. It takes like a little bit of time to like log and show metrics. So that's kind of the idea behind how these metrics and these things are set up. One of the things that's important to think about is when you're building out like APIs and stuff like that is, okay, when is stuff logged? And like, so for example, in this case, one of the things that you might be, that might be interesting here to y'all is that this is going to be logged on the server side as opposed to being logged like in the HTML. Because you could also put like an on click here, or you could put on click, and then you could put like a function in here, like bust out JavaScript in Python or whatever. But like I don't recommend that. But that's like, you could also potentially put the logging on the client side so that it happens before you even hit the sign up page, because that can be another way to kind of log stuff. And so you can do client side logging and server side logging, and they have their different benefits and risks, right? So server side logging is generally easier to set up. Like you saw how I set this up in like, I don't know, like 5 seconds. And so that is the great thing about server side logging. Client side logging is a little bit trickier because of the fact that we don't want like, and here's the problem with client side logging is we don't want to give random clients the ability to just log whatever they want to our servers. So you have to do this thing called like OAuth, authorization with your client, which like is a little bit more complicated. But the thing is like you also get better fidelity data that way, because you get the event when they clicked and like when they did the action in the client, not when the server picked it up. So like you actually get like better events and higher quality events, and like you also can get things like scroll time and like view time. And like I know at Facebook they have this notion of this thing called time spent, which is like how long someone is spending in the feed, and that could be another powerful thing for people to work with. And the time spent is mostly a client side logging kind of mechanism, and all those metrics can be very important for experimentation as well. So this is kind of the idea, right? Is you want to set up your servers to do both. And generally speaking, you want to start with doing server side logging because it's just easier, just so much easier. And then after a while, what you can do is you can set up other sort of things, right? So one of the things, I don't know if y'all saw, but if you go to like zachwilson.tech, and I'm currently running an experiment here on this sign up button. So this sign up button for some people is red, and for some people it's blue, depending on like who you are. It's the way I have it set up right now is it's 80% red, 20% blue, and so that's just something to see, and definitely know that that's like a thing that's happening. But let me show you how that works, because for that experiment, like I actually didn't run an experiment with it. What I did was I used what's called a feature gate. So there's a couple differences there. Feature gate, one of the big things about it is like you don't get groups. You only get a yes or a no. And in this case, I have like red or blue, which is also just if you have two outcomes, then like you can use a feature gate as well. And feature gates can sometimes be simpler to work with than experiments because feature gates don't have like you'll see like when you're in this feature gate page, you'll see there's no like make a decision, and you can also edit things like as whenever you want. Whereas experiments like are a little bit more like controlled, where you have to just like they have to be fixed at a certain time. But feature gates are awesome, especially like you know how I was talking about those long-term holdouts of like people who don't receive notifications on Facebook or different sort of things like that. So what you get in this case is this is going to be my kind of homepage, show new homepage, which it's just filtering that button, right? So you see the split here. So we have like 80% means that 80% gets red and 20% gets blue. And obviously I can change this. I can make this 50% if I wanted to. And then that's gonna be fine. And that will like, and it will just change the environment of the thing. But the idea behind this is you can also kind of do longer term experiments here. So let me show you what I mean by like, okay, so here's my here's the results. So I set this up like 2 days ago, I think. Yeah, August 11th. I set this up on it was like more on Saturday. But so in that time, in the last 2 days, there's been like 2,700 people who have like been part of this experiment in the last like 3 days, and we don't have Monday's data yet. But you'll see like it's keeping that nice like 80-20 split. Like so, what that means is 2,200 people have seen the red button and 500 people have seen the blue button. And it's keeping that nice 80-20 split that we're expecting. So this is where you get more data behind like statistical significance. So one of the things you'll notice here is for our 90% confidence interval, you'll see that like every single bar overlaps 0. So if any of these bars overlap 0, what that means is like the effect could be negative or positive, like we don't know. And so that's like kind of like frustrating. But like what essentially that means from this experiment so far is that it doesn't matter that much, right? Red button versus blue button does not matter that much. But you'll see, like, I can go in here and I can edit this confidence interval. So let me show you, like, what the difference here is. Let's go to 80% confidence interval. And you'll see, okay, with the 80% confidence interval, now we have a statistically significant result. We have this guy here, this visited sign up. But, because its p-value is 0.17, and that's less than 0.2. But like most data scientists might look at this and be like, I don't know if I can trust that because there still is like almost a 20% chance that this could be random. And so that's a thing to remember when you're like interpreting these results is that the confidence interval matters quite a bit. And so generally speaking, you want it to be set to 95. So you see how this is like alpha equals 0.2, alpha equals 0.05. That's essentially the alpha is the probability that you're wrong, the probability that you are saying that this is not a coincidence when it actually is a coincidence. And that's where the 95% confidence interval, generally speaking, is the better play. But one of the things that I want to show as well, though, is these things aren't necessarily just, you can look at things more specific, right? So, for example, so you see this is that visited sign up, not a statistically significant result. And you'll see like, okay, even if you group it by different countries, like you see, okay, Canada, Great Britain, India, they're all not statistically significant. But if we drop this to 80%, the only reason I'm doing this is to show y'all like kind of how things can be different here though. But you see, okay, so now this experiment that like is statistically significant overall, it's actually not statistically significant in India, and it's not statistically significant in Great Britain. But apparently the US and Canada, they just freaking love, the US in particular really loves like red buttons, right? This is almost like, you almost can get, you can almost use zero point 0.9 as your confidence interval, like a 90% confidence interval for the US. But you'll notice that like for India and Great Britain, like the color really does not matter. And so that's one of the things to think about when you are also running your statistical tests is there actually an underlying population where things might be different, where things might be like, for example, maybe I run a test where instead of putting my prices in dollars, I put my prices in INR. And if I put my prices in INR, like I would imagine it would hurt the US and it would help India. So like that's just a an obvious like duh sort of example that would have of an experiment that would have a very strong impact on like a certain slice of your users and in probably a detrimental slice on another set of users. And so that's a thing to think about when you're like building out this kind of stuff is when you're running experiments, like you might not get like a clean thing where it's like, okay, yeah, overall we get a bump, but like for some users it might be a drop and for other users it might be a gain. It's not always like a clean and cut, like everybody wins and it's always a better experience for everybody. So that's another thing to think about when you're kind of like building out different things. So so feature gates are really powerful in that way, and they can do some really good stuff. One of the things that I just wanted to kind of end with here with experimentation is that experiments are going to be one of the most important ways to have impact as a data engineer. And it's tricky because of the fact that when you are doing experimentation and setting stuff up and like getting this far where you end up having these like actual pages where you can look at stuff is like, it's very far removed from the actual data engineering job. And like, that's one of the things that like I think will change in some regards. And I'm hoping that some of y'all, you pick the analytics track, and my understanding is that some of y'all that pick the analytics track, actually your goal might be to be more of like an analytics engineer or a data scientist or like another kind of role like that. And that's where like having this knowledge can be very useful, but it can also be very useful for data engineers as well, because it's like, okay, what metrics, like what other numbers do we need in these charts like this so that data scientists can have a clearer picture of their experiments? So like that's one of the big things that they do in big tech, right? So this is one of the things that Airbnb is kind of like leading the way on, is they have this thing called Minerva, which is like a metric repository of all the metrics that like Airbnb could care about. And then so then in an experiment, you can have all these metrics. And one of the things that you can do with some of these metrics, so if I go to metrics, and let me go to like visited sign up. So if I go into this metric here, and I go to setup here, there should be a way, isn't there a way to do it? You can't do it in here? Oh, that's lame. Okay, well, anyways, most metrics have a way of being what's called, is it metric catalog? Go here. I think this is where it is. Okay, so you can catalog metrics. And then I think in here, you can add manage tags. There we go. There we go. So like in here, you can create a new tag. And then we can say like guardrail, right? So these are all the metrics that should never go down, right? Okay, so now I have my tags, and I have this tag for guardrail. And now that will be what we can use for our different metrics catalogs. And you'll see now if I add that to here, I can be like guardrail metric. And then I can add another guardrail metric. So what guardrail metrics do is they are metrics that are so important to the business that like if an experiment causes these numbers to go down, that experiment is essentially blocked from deploying. For example, at Airbnb, the guardrail metric that I worked on was reservation profitability. So it's like if we have an experiment that significantly drops profitability, then that experiment probably is not going to launch. But that's not like that's a no go, right? And so that is where data engineers can actually have a very important impact and play a very important role in experimentation. Is if your company has the notion of a guardrail metric, that metric can be owned essentially by you as a data engineer or an analytics engineer. And it's essentially a way to prevent data scientists and product managers from like going too wild and doing all sorts of crazy shit, because like you don't want them to do that, right? Because if they are doing crazy stuff, like that's going to hurt the business and it's going to hurt these metrics. And so, and you don't want them to do that. Like that's not a solid way to go about doing stuff, you know? And so I would recommend in those cases to like really invest in quality, because that was one of the things that was the problem with like with guardrail metrics. When you create them, they have to be very high quality, right? You can't have crazy quality bugs in your guardrail metrics, because like they're gonna stop experiments, right? They have to be very trusted. So like they have to have very high quality. They also have to be very fresh, because you can't have like your guardrail data being behind where you have your data scientists who needed to determine, do I launch this experiment? Do I not launch this experiment? Right? You have to do that as well. And like if you do that, like okay, like how do you have like a regularly refreshing metric that is a guardrail metric that people can use, that will then prevent them from launching bad experiments and making bad decisions? And that's where I'm hoping that between like weeks 3, when we were talking a lot about data quality and talking about like how to have high data quality using things like write, audit, publish. And then in week 4, we're talking about like analytical patterns, where you have those state change patterns. Those state change patterns are very often guardrail metrics, where you don't want to have too many users churning. You also don't want to have too many users who are like stale, or like too many fake accounts that are coming in, right? There could be all sorts of different things that can happen that can make guardrail metrics very important for launching experiments. So that's the kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, at least in this kind of UI, and how you can kind of catalog these different metrics into different buckets of things.
Congrats on getting to the end of the day 1 lab. If you're taking this class for credit, make sure to switch over to the other tab so you can get credit for the day 2 lecture.
Leading and lagging metrics. Ultimately, almost every metric that you write should be correlated in some way with money. And the metric might even be money. Revenue is its own metric. One of the problems with revenue as a metric is that it can be kind of slow moving, and there's a lot of things that have to happen before revenue happens. And so generally speaking, revenue is going to be what I would call a lagging metric, whereas there's going to be a lot of other leading metrics, right? So in this case, as data engineers, the data that we provide should be linked to money, either in increasing revenue or decreasing cost. So maybe we're optimizing a job, and so that's like where it's very meta. When you're optimizing pipelines, it's a very meta way of doing it, because like the data about the data that you're creating is saving money, right? It's very like meta. But maybe you're supplying data that makes customer service more efficient, and then that makes their process faster and their thing better. So that's what I'm saying. In that case, it's like you're supplying data that cuts costs in other areas of the business. But that's not to say that data engineering itself doesn't have costs. So you can do it that way too, optimizing pipelines, optimizing business processes, reducing cost. And you can also have it be on the other side, where you can increase revenue, where you have new data sets that provide new additional context that allow people to take more risks, or to have a better understanding of the competitive environment, so that they can raise or lower prices to get more volume or more margin. And so there's all sorts of these metrics in the business area that are going to be linked to money. I think there is like one exception here. Obviously, the one exception I think is where you're working in like a nonprofit, if you're like a not like working in like a charity or a nonprofit, then maybe your North Star metric is different, where it might be lives saved or people helped or children educated or garbage taken out of the ocean. But even then, even nonprofits still care about the other side, though. They still care about spend. They still care about cost and spend, because that side of it, how much you spend, if you can make that more efficient, then that's gonna increase the other goals of the nonprofit. So even in nonprofits, a lot of the metrics are still going to be about money. So that's a key thing to remember here. And like the other key thing I want to talk about on this slide is that money and revenue, cost savings, revenue, money, all that stuff is, generally speaking, a lagging metric. And there's going to be other metrics that are precede it, that are correlated with that metric, but move faster and are easier to capture. So we're going to go in a little bit more detail here. Okay, so leading versus lagging. So you have inputs and outputs. So you could think about it like on a website, you have the number of people who visit the website, and then you have the number of people who sign up, and then you have the number of people who buy. You can think of that as like almost a two-step funnel, right? It has two places where people can kind of like fall off. And so the example there, the input there is the visits, the number of people who actually get to the website. Because just because they visited doesn't mean they're going to produce revenue. Like there's probably a high probability that they don't. And but there's going to be a small percentage of users who visit your website who do buy. And then those people are going to be impacting the lagging metric on the other side, the kind of the more revenue and the sales metric on the other side. So you can think of it as like if you have like a process in place and you have a bunch of inputs into that process, those are going to be your leading metrics. In this example, you have like web page visits and signups, and maybe there's one upstream of that, of web page visits. Maybe there's like social media impressions, because you have people who saw the social media post and clicked, but you also have people who saw the social media post and didn't click. And then you can go down one layer and down one layer, down one layer, right? And you can do all sorts of really cool stuff that way. So that's definitely one way that you can go. And that's like a good example of leading versus lagging metrics. And generally speaking, the further away, and obviously it's a continuum, right? Because if you have the social media impression to the website visit, to the sign up, to the purchase, you can say that like, okay, you can actually probably put a dollar value on how much each social media impression is worth based on the percent of people who saw the post to the percent of people who bought, which is usually a very, very, very small number. But in those cases, that is called your conversion rate. And that would be the full funnel. That's like from everyone who was even a part of the funnel to everyone who made it to the bottom of the funnel. So, and there's a correlation there, and that's the conversion rate. It's going to be the percent of people who saw the post on social media to the percent of people who actually bought, which is usually a pretty steep drop off. So that's the idea behind leading and lagging metrics, and they are all very important to look at. And because sometimes maybe it's not a conversion problem. Maybe you're converting at a pretty high rate. Maybe 10% are converting, and maybe it's an impressions problem where you're not getting enough top of the funnel, and that's the problem. It's just you don't have enough leads, or maybe the conversion is the problem, or maybe the sign up step is the problem. There's like all sorts of different places. Essentially, every step of this funnel should be analyzed because every step can have problems. So yeah. Another thing that we're going to talk about here, this is where we're going to have probably an interesting discussion, is that these leading and lagging metrics can also apply to your life. So, for example, if you're getting a job, you could say that, like, I'm going to spend 100 hours practicing SQL to get ready for job interviews, and then that's like your input metric, and then the final funnel metric is going to be like the jobs received, right? And then you could also think of it as like you could have an extremely lagging metric, which is like, oh, all those hours I spent learning SQL, in 5 or 6 years, I'm going to be running a boot camp where I teach people how to get better jobs. And so like that would be the extremely lagging metric that's even more than just like I got the job, right? It's that I learned all the stuff and then I taught other people and then they got jobs. And so that the funnel keeps going on. And so like anyways, when you're like trying to get a job, there's all sorts of different things that you need to think about, right? Where you have, do you have the skills? Do you have the learning? Do you have the necessary skill set to even apply? And then you also have like the application process of like, how many job applications do I fill out? How many recruiters do I talk to? That kind of stuff. That's another important piece of the puzzle, right? And then you have like further down, you have how many interviews do I give? How many interviews do I pass? Right? And then how many job offers do I get? And which job offer do I accept? Right? There's like a lot of steps in that process of this kind of leading and lagging metrics of like the professional world. And one of the things you can think of is like, okay, the conversion rate in this case is how many hours of like practice, like hours per job interview. It's like a pretty good like rate way to think of like the conversion rate of your job funnel. And you might want to optimize that, where you might be spending too much time applying for jobs that don't call you back, or you might be spending too much time leak code practicing when it's like you're getting a marginal value from it. And like, who knows, there could be a lot of different places in the funnel that you are not doing a good job. So the whole idea is really there is a 5-step funnel for like your learning and job environment, where the first step is your effort. This is going to be things like, what should I learn? How should I learn it? Like, how many hours am I putting in here? How much effort am I showing? How do I show up? And then you have brand and networking, which is like, who are the people that I know? How do I market my skills? How do I like get known for what I want to be known for? Then you have like the job interview, like where should I apply? How am I successful in the job interview? How do I make sure that my skills match what the employers are looking for? Then you have job success, which is like where you get the job and you are successful and you get promoted. And like, how do you keep learning and growing here and building up further and further up the ladder? And then after that, you have helping others and changing the world, where you are able to get your job and get really far. And then how can you teach and grow other people and get further along and have an even wider, more expansive impact on the world as you grow? And so we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more in detail, because you want to be applying experiments in your life at pretty much every single one of these steps, so that you can get more input on like what is good and what is not working. Okay, so we have the top of the funnel. This is where you're learning and maybe networking, the first two. So I think that there's a lot of problems in that first bucket of like just jumping from tutorial to tutorial and like going too broad with your learning, where maybe you're like, I want to learn 13 programming languages because I think I'm going to be so good at the world, right? And like, is that really, is knowing 13 really better than knowing 3 really well? No. All right. And so there's going to be a lot of different things here. And then obviously you have other things, like you have people who are trying to sell you boot camps and people who are trying to, you have paid stuff and free stuff and college and graduate programs. And like, there's so many different choices that you want to make here. Another big thing that I think is very important here, because I get this question a lot, is around like, Zach, should I go back to school? Should I go and get a master's degree? And I think this is one of the big questions that's in this first bucket is, and this is an act of self-awareness when you're building out these learning funnels for yourself, is how dedicated and motivated am I without structure? Right. For example, for me, I'm on the extreme end where I built this boot camp out of thin air. I didn't need anyone to tell me what to do and how to build it. I was just, I'm going to build this thing and I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to show people how to do it. And I'm going to kind of build my own path and learn my own way. And that's essentially why for me, I never found it interesting to go to graduate school, nor did I find it necessary, because I knew that like my own learnings and my own skill set is going to be good enough, because I have such a thirst for learning that it doesn't matter. Whereas with other people, they need that structure, especially the earlier you are in your career. That's why I think for me, I'm grateful for my bachelor's degree in computer science. I think that was very good for me, because that gave me a good like foundation to kind of build off of. So like a lot of times when people are like, should I get a bachelor's degree? I'm like, probably like a boot camp replacing a bachelor's degree a lot of the times is not going to be the case because you're not going to get the same level of foundation. But again, it depends on the person, because if you have an extreme thirst for knowledge and you're a good self learner, then you're probably good. Um, let's talk a little bit more about the second bucket, where there's brand building and networking, because there's more to it than just being a good engineer. You have to also be building your network of people who know you, so that opportunities come your way and you can build relationships. And I think the number one mistake here is just people don't do it. They don't take it seriously. They think that, if I get good enough at coding, a job will fall into my lap. And like that's a kind of a ridiculous way to go about it. Like I think of it similarly to like dating in that way, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna find the love of my life sitting on the couch. Like I think a lot of people like honestly believe that about their career, and that's totally not the case. Obviously, networking is important. I would say don't just network on LinkedIn. Like branch out to either other social medias or do like in-person events. I love in-person events. In-person events is really where I meet a lot of the people that I develop really deep partnerships with. So just letting you know that that's another good thing to think about. Some questions and experimentations here are like, how should I market the skills I've learned? Like a big thing there is like, what job title do I want? Like, how do I want to like go about it? How do I want to grow my career? Do I want to pivot? I know for me that that experiment of how should I market the skills I've learned, I've experimented with that question a lot in my career, and like because sometimes I get unsatisfied with being a data engineer, and then I switch to being a software engineer, then I go back to being a data engineer, and I've kind of like jump roped a lot with that question. I've ran the experiment a lot. And then you also have like, who should I network with? Because I think that especially if you're early on, like it's hard to know like what networks and what connections are going to actually produce value. I think a lot of people who are early in their career, they think that networking is just passing your resume to people and then them giving you a job, and they think it's very like transactional like that, when it's like it's not like that at all. Like it's not like that at all. You want to be, when you're thinking about building your network, you really want to be thinking about how you are interacting with other people and supporting other people and showing up for other people and like providing them value in some way if you can. Those things are all very, very useful for when you want to build your network. So that's the idea behind the top of the funnel for your learning experience. Okay, then you have the middle of the funnel. This is going to be brand building and job interview. Uh, so there's a couple things here. I think a big one here that people make a big mistake on is they only apply to jobs where they meet all the requirements. That's a big mistake. Very big mistake, because like then you're just gonna like you're never gonna grow into a job. You're only gonna ever get a job that you're completely comfortable with, which means that you're gonna grow very slowly, and that's not the way to go. Like one of my most viral posts on LinkedIn ever was one where I talked about how when I applied to the job at Airbnb, it said that that the person they were looking for, it was 10 plus years of experience, and I had 6. And so and I got the job. So like sometimes like you can, because it's like if you can get the interview, they already think that you have enough of like your background is already fitting enough, and it's all about just being convincing in the interview at that point. And if you can do that, then great. That's the middle of the funnel. Let's go a little bit further down. Okay. So you have this next part of the funnel, which is going from job interview to job success and job interview to job promotion. In this case, we're no longer talking about filling out applications. Like you already got the interviews, right? Um, I think a big thing here, right, is in the interview, I think people get caught up with trying to prove themselves a lot of the time, especially in big tech. I think this is less the case in other interviews, but in big tech in particular, there's like it feels like the interview is one-sided, where like you're trying to prove to Facebook that you're a good enough engineer, but like that Facebook doesn't have to prove anything to you. They don't have to show up in anything like that, right? And like I mean, that's always like in all the big tech freaking companies I've asked this question. This is one question that I've asked in every single engineer who I have interviewed with. I say like, if you could change one aspect of your job, what would it be? And see what they have to say. listen to them. That's why I will never work at Amazon, right? And so it's like, because Amazon is like just so hardcore and so intense. And so, like, and they're not going to change, right? They're not going to change. That's not something that if you accept a role at Amazon, that's what's going to happen, right? You're accepting a lot of intensity and you're accepting a lot of just a lot of work. And so you need to learn about the whole company as well. And just because you're interviewing, and a lot of times, like, that's why I like talking to the individual engineers, not just the hiring manager, because I feel like the hiring manager has a lot more pressure to put someone in a seat. Whereas the individual engineers on the team, they generally don't have as much pressure. So they are more likely to tell you like the complete truth about working at that company. So that's a big thing to remember. Always ask questions because it makes you look good too. It makes you look good too because it makes you look less desperate. It makes it look like you're also evaluating them, and the interview panel will respect you more for it. And I think that's one of the big things for me that has helped me a lot in my career. And another big thing is like ask the manager, the hiring manager, about stuff. Right? Try to identify a bad hiring manager before you join that team. I think that's one of the big things that I was looking at in my career as well. Is that like if you, especially like if you're trying to find like someone who is a little bit more micromanagey or anything like that, and there's a lot of good questions that you can ask them to like try to pick out some of that, right? To see like obviously you can't ask like are you a micromanager because everyone says no to that because they know that that's like a bad word. But if you ask questions that are more like, okay, if I'm like, I like asking this question. If I'm 2 weeks behind on a project and I'm not sure where it's going to go, how would you react as a manager? And just see what they have to say. Because if your manager only supports you when times are good, like they're not supportive and they're not going to help you. And so, because that's one of the big things, like if you have an unsupportive manager is literally the most detrimental thing that can happen to your career. And so, like picking them out before you get the job is so much better than having to deal with them after you get the job. Like it's so much better. It's like finding the red flags, right? In dating, same idea. Another big thing is like don't just focus on coding. Coding is only one aspect of it. Like I think for me as a staff engineer at Airbnb, coding was only like maybe half the job or a little bit less than half the job. Whereas like a lot of it's more like leadership and diplomacy and compromise and design and scalability and a lot of stuff like that, which are just very different things. So like some other experiments that you want to think about on the other side here for job success and promotion is so I say, how do I take my job to the next level? So sometimes you might want to recognize I do have an unsupportive manager and I will not get promoted in this current role and I need to look elsewhere and I need to go and interview again. And that's how I'll take my job to the next level. And that will be an easier way to get to the next level than working really hard and like trying to please my toxic boss. Right. And another big one is like, how do I keep providing value? So this one is an interesting one because a lot of times like I've noticed at these companies, like they'll ask you to deliver on some big project that might take a year or 18 months, but then you have to keep seeking out more and more projects. And so a part of that is like, okay, how do I like source all these projects? And a part of that is like having a deeper understanding of the business and talking with people and really understanding where some needs are. And the other side of it is like just being able to recognize when things aren't scalable and trying to find other pain points, maybe even on your own team. Like we were talking a lot about on-call this week in the infrastructure track, and optimizing on-call is always a very, very noble thing to do to keep providing value. All right. So we have the end of the funnel. So you have two pieces of this, right? Where it's like, okay, you have your job success, you have your promotion, you're living your best life, right? uh, at some point you should be thinking about giving back and thinking about how you're gonna teach other people or grow other people or save the planet. And it doesn't have to be through teaching and mentoring. Obviously, that can be one path. That's the path I chose, is mentoring and teaching. But there's a lot of other ways that you can help and change the world, and like make sure that you do that. Make sure that you don't just like sit back and you're like, oh man, like I'm making so much money in big tech now, and I'm just gonna like retire early and sip martinis on the beach for the rest of my life. when there's like a lot of problems in the world, and like as data engineers with disposable income, we are incredibly privileged to be where we're at. And so if that's the case, like we kind of have a responsibility to give back and to help other people and to help the world become a better place beyond just making, Facebook and Google a lot of money. So make sure to actually think about that as like you get further in your career, and don't get too money focused, and remember that like it's all about impact. It's not about money, it's about impact. And if you can remember that, that will be another very important part of like kind of finishing off this funnel and getting to the end of your career. So this is kind of that's kind of like the whole funnel kind of thing. We're about to break out into breakout rooms. We'll probably break out for about 15-20 minutes. Let me go to the next slide here. So in our discussion this time, we're going to have just 3 things here. One is going to be introduce yourself and your favorite SQL keyword, whether that be like from, select, group by, having, whatever. That's the first. And then you want to talk about what leading and lagging metrics do you find important in your career, whatever those might be. Like part of it might be a learning metric, or part of it might be an earning metric, or part of it might be a balance metric, or whatever you want to talk about. And then the last one is have these changed as you progress throughout your career? Have you had any priority shifts? Let's talk about the kind of more of a product analytics example. This is like more of like the actual meat of this presentation today. So if you think about it from the perspective of, say, I'm trying to sell someone something, that funnel has the top of the funnel could be like, I pay Google so that I show up first on the Google search result, and then they see my link. That's going to be like the very first top of the funnel. And then maybe they click on that link, which would be the next layer, right? Then they visit my webpage, right? And then they sign up. They give me their email. That'll be the next layer. And then once they are in the website, then they will view the products, and then they find a product they like, and then they buy that product. That's the next layer. And then they use that product for a while, and they enjoy that product, and they get a lot of joy out of that product. That's going to be the next layer. And then the final layer is they love the product, and then they tell their friends about the product, and that's where you get that kind of like testimonial, and then they might want to buy again. So you get like a kind of a big, long kind of journey for anyone in that kind of product space. And you'll see we have you have testimonial as kind of the final end of this process. Because you can think about like the percent of people. Because if you think about it this way, like, okay, on LinkedIn, right, I average like about 7 million impressions a month, right? And so you can think of like, okay, of those 7 million impressions in July when people were buying this boot camp, okay, how many of those are going to actually turn into testimonials, right? So it can be like maybe 20 or 30, maybe. If I'm lucky, 30 if y'all love me, right? And so it's like, what's 30 divided by 7 million? It's a pretty small fraction there. But that just goes to show that how these funnels have steep drop-offs in a bunch of different places. Obviously, the very steep drop-off here was the $1,300 that I asked y'all to pay, or the $1,800, right? That was like, because if it was free, there would be thousands and thousands of y'all in here, and that would not be as good, right? Because or like, I mean, then that would not have as much of a steep drop-off. If I did a boot camp that was free, I bet I could get a couple more testimonials that way, but then I would starve. So it's a little bit, it's a tricky problem, right? So anyways, you have product analytics. This is a massive funnel. We're going to kind of, I have another funnel visualization for y'all we can kind of go over. So this is going to be the kind of the funnel that works with business. And I'm actually going to go into great detail here about how I have been thinking like a product manager when building out this bootcamp, and how I've been really trying to improve different areas of this bootcamp to make things better for y'all. And so that we can, so that I can, because one of my goals, right, is I'm hoping that I can get as many, because right now everyone in this call, you are probably going to be, since it's like the 5th week of the bootcamp, you're going to be between this purchased step and this engaged step. most of y'all are going to be in the engaged step at this point, because if you're still tuning in to the live boot camps in week 5, you're pretty engaged, right? So I've already got y'all down to this like 4th step of the funnel, and I'm hoping that we can get through the whole funnel here with y'all, as many as I can. And so this is a very common funnel that is just, it runs the world of business. And we're going to go over in the same way. We're going to go over that we went over the job application and like getting a job funnel. We're going to go over how this works essentially from a different angle, in more of a product analytics angle. So let's dig into it. Okay. So you have the top of the funnel. So one of the only reasons that y'all are in this bootcamp right now is because of something that I started 2.5 years ago. I started consistently getting impressions on LinkedIn, because that's one of the beautiful things about organic reach in this current world that we live in. Is it's a great way that you can get awareness on what you do and who you are, and it can, generate you revenue, and it can help have you create more things, right? And so keeping in mind that at every step in this funnel, you can run A/B tests, you can run experiments, you can do all sorts of analytics. And having analytics, A/B tests, and experiments, all that stuff, if you can do all of that like at each step of this funnel, you're going to have a better time. So for example, for impressions, there's going to be a couple different things here. I'm going to talk about paid impressions first, and then we can kind of go over other things. So one of the biggest things that you need to do when you are looking for when you have a bunch of different channels that are spilling into your business is that you need to track where people are coming from. So if you remember in some of the other labs that we worked on, there was that referrer column in my website analytics. And that is going to be the main way that I track that. I also track things a little bit, like that is not that great because that only tracks at the website level. Like I want to actually get to a point where instead I track at the content piece level, so that I can do conversions and look at things more from like this piece of content's better than that piece of content sort of idea. So I can actually, on an ad by ad basis, I can actually look at things with a finer grain of detail. I do not have that detail right now. So what I can do right now with my impressions and conversion analytics is I can compare Twitter to LinkedIn to Instagram to TikTok, right, at the highest level, because I can compare those domains from the referrer. But I don't have the actual content links. So I can't compare like a LinkedIn post to another LinkedIn post. That is a future iteration on my analytics that I'm looking to do. So that's going to be the first type of experiment that you can do, is like really, it's not even really an experiment. It's more of like just an awareness. Because then if you have tracking all the way down to the piece of content, then you can compare conversion rates between that piece of content and another piece of content. And you can be like, okay, why did this piece do so much better? And then maybe it's something in the writing or the hook, or maybe someone else commented, or there was like some other kind of anomalous thing that was going on in those pieces, right? But anyways, for me, even at the high level that I have that, just the platform level. One of the things that taught me throughout my business was, so when I did this stuff, so I have 31,000 followers on TikTok, right? It's not like I'm small on TikTok. TikTok's my 3rd biggest platform. And so when I was selling my course and I made a video on TikTok about my course on my bootcamp, nobody converted. Literally zero converted, even though I had the tracking and no one bought. And I was like, wow, TikTok, sad. Like Instagram converted great. On a percentage basis, Instagram was the best. Instagram converted better than LinkedIn, but LinkedIn converted the most because I just have such a big following on LinkedIn. But Instagram on a percentage basis actually was the best. And so that was, I learned a lot just from about my own social media usage and my own social media powers, and like which platforms I need to invest more in. So after selling this bootcamp, I learned that like the platforms that I need to invest more in are LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Or X now, I guess is what it's called, but Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. Those 3 platforms converted really well. And so that's one. Now, let's say I ran paid ads. I don't really do paid ads because like I don't necessarily think that like the ROI on them is worth it. But you could also imagine, okay, how much does it cost per click? Like You can iterate and experiment with the different creative art that you have, the different marketing art that you have, and you can see like, oh, people click on this more often than this, and then that makes our ad dollars go further. So you can kind of experiment with ad creatives, and then to understand like how to get more people to actually click and more people to actually convert. And again, like you want to put a channel tracking or a content creative tracking. Like I'm sure you've seen when you like click on a piece of content on Facebook, it has like this weird like UTM underscore source equals. It throws that in the URL, and then your URL is like really long and nasty. It's because like a lot of these platforms already do that for you automatically. LinkedIn's not one of them actually, but that's going to be your first kind of set of different experiments that you can run at the very highest level of the funnel. This is just to like, this is experimenting with how many eyeballs can I get on the thing that I'm building. And then it's like, okay, great. That means that some of them are hopefully converting to a sign up page or an email acquisition page. For a long time on LinkedIn, this is what I did to build my business was I said sign up for my newsletter, and then I had a way to collect people's email. And I collected like 15,000 emails this way. And I never even sent a newsletter. And I remember people were getting mad because like I collected emails for like 18 months saying I was going to like start a newsletter. And people were like, "So where's your newsletter, bro? I gave you my email." And like I was like, "It's coming. It's coming." And I mean, I actually did start it like about 2 months ago now. And so it's like actually a real thing now. But anyways, that was a big thing I did because I didn't have another offer at the time. I didn't have like a course to sell them or anything else. So I was like, well, I'm just going to collect their email so that I can contact them directly later on, so that I don't have to do this step of the funnel with that user again. And that's another very important thing to remember is that like you really do want to set things up in place so that you can get people to they can start deeper in the funnel than where they're at. So obviously, when you're at this stage, there's going to be a bunch of things that you can do here. One of the big ones is going to be A/B testing your landing pages. I'm sure y'all remember in the lab on Monday, we covered how to do that with StatSig on like how to do a blue button or a green button or a yellow button and like trying different kind of experiences. Obviously, you can change the text and the colors and the designs and all that stuff as well. As a data engineer, you probably want to work with a front end person on that, unless you're also really good at HTML or something like that. But I don't know. There's not that many data engineers who are great at HTML. So landing pages, you want to optimize those to try to get them to convert to give you their email. And that's all. This second step is not even about anything else. It's not about getting them to sign up for anything really. It's about, can I get a contact point from them? Whether most likely email, maybe SMS if you're being like a weird company. Another thing that you're going to want to test here, and this is like less of an experiment and more of an optimization, is your page speed. So page speed. The last piece of experiments that you really want to run on this like first initial contact point with your customer is going to be responsiveness, which is like, okay, can we cut our conversion by tablet or by PC, tablet, or phone? And does it look good on all of them? And that's where, like, if you optimize for page speed and optimize for responsiveness, then you're going to get the widest percent of users, both from the angle of it looking good and for it performing well. Because if you optimize for page speed, that almost always means that your page is going to be less data. And the less data you send, even for worse devices, it's still going to work pretty well, even on bad devices, or even on like, not bad devices, like old devices. It's still going to work pretty well. And then you can optimize for a wider range of people, because remember that not everyone in the world runs on an iPhone 14 with the best specs, right? There's a lot, like, that's not even the average. That's like the top 10% of the world uses that. So this is the first piece of the funnel. We're at top of the funnel here. So that's how you can get down to, at this point, now at this point, we have an email. We have an email for people that we can then contact them directly. We no longer have to pray that the LinkedIn algorithm shows my content to them anymore, and we can just contact them directly. Okay, so now we have middle of the funnel. This is going to be where you are going from signups to purchases, right? That's going to be a big kind of step that is the next kind of step of this puzzle. So purchases are going to be an interesting one because of a couple different things. The experiments in purchase are trickier because of the fact that like you have more risk when you're like fiddling with stuff. Like for example, if I was like, hey everyone, you can get 80% off my bootcamp right now. Like some of y'all in this call would be like, can I get that discount? Right? And it's like, so you kind of like some of your pricing experiments can run a risk of upsetting current customers, so you want to be careful about how you are doing that. I even remember like during this boot camp, this is something I think Divya might be on this call, but I think Divya is someone who is in this boot camp, and like when I released the self-paced course, I recognized that the combined version, I priced it at the wrong point, and I priced it too low. And a couple of y'all in the bootcamp called that out, and you were like, "Why can they get all of the content for less?" And so I actually ended up raising the price before anybody bought though. Now, and that's why I was grateful for y'all, because I ended up raising the price a little bit to make all to make the pricing structure fair for everyone. And so that's a very important thing to remember. But at the same time, like when depending on where you're at, like there is and what you're selling, pricing is a little bit more flexible. Like for example, at Airbnb, right? They have their own pricing stuff. They have AI and ML that sets a lot of prices, and so they have to understand elasticities. So elasticity is essentially the more you raise prices, the fewer people will buy. But also, it's also true the other way around. The more you lower prices, the more people will buy. And so there's usually a sweet spot in the middle there where you optimize for like the integral of purchases times price. And that's going to be like where you are going to make the most money. But not necessarily. That can also, like, you know, for example, if you're like Rolex, I highly doubt that the integral for them of like charging $50,000 for a watch is the right place to go. They're not Walmart, right? They're not going for volume, right? They're going for margin. And so like it really does depend on your strategy as a company as well. So pricing can be a big thing. And also remember on the pricing page, right? So this is something that I did, and I'm curious what y'all are gonna think about this, but I don't know if y'all have ever heard of like the decoy strategy before. Like, because you know at Starbucks, like a lot of times, like how it works is like if you have small, medium, large, like the small is 4, the medium's 550, and then the large is 6, and then it's like you get the large every time, like because it's like the pricing structure is stupid. The pricing structure is really weird, right? And so for me, that was like I had a pricing strategy that I put in place in this bootcamp that was way more successful than I thought it was going to be. Actually, it was like because I thought like initially when I came up with like the different tracks, like the analytics, infrastructure, and combined tracks for this bootcamp, I thought that most people were going to buy a single track, and no. I think it's 65% of you bought the combined track, and it makes sense because y'all are smart. Because if you look at the per hour basis of the content, if you buy a single track, the content is $30 an hour. If you buy the combined track, the content is $18 an hour. So you get a way better deal because it's only because the way you think about it is like it's only $500 more for double the content. So it's like really in like $1,800. Like if it was on the dollar for dollar basis, it should have been $2,600. But y'all like were smart and like you saw that like, oh yeah, this is going to be a lot more content and I'm going to learn a lot more by buying the combined track. And that was the whole point, is that because I wanted people to be invested. I wanted people to feel like they were getting the best option. I wanted people to buy the large. Right. And so that's where when you're thinking about pricing and thinking about how you're going to build your products, like thinking about like how you want to nudge people to buy something, like is definitely one of the things that is an important thing to do. Because I personally think that like that's the right way to go. Like and like because then it also gives people options. Because I also recognize that like $1,300 and $1,800 is like not cheap. So I wanted people to be able to get in at a lower price point if that like served them. So that's kind of the idea behind pricing and how you can kind of fiddle with pricing to, get what you want out of what to change customer behavior even. Okay, so now we are getting deeper into the funnel here. Now at this point, y'all have bought. So thank you. Like y'all have made it this deep into the funnel of my bootcamp, and you have the pricing structure, elasticities. Y'all learn about that. Most of y'all bought the large, and then you want to get them engaged and retained. So a big part of that is onboarding, getting a smooth onboarding process. Some things that I tried to implement there were like the intake form to get people into groups. I also got people onto the GitHub as quickly as I could, and also got people like in the Discord chatting and starting to build community. And that was, I feel like, mostly a win. Later on, this is something I'm not doing right now. It's something I'm implementing. My developers are implementing. This is not as important for the bootcamp, but for self-paced people, it's very important. Is notifications to kind of, if someone hasn't done anything in the bootcamp in like, I don't know, a week or two, we're gonna try to get them back by sending them an email and being like, "Yo, like, come watch a lab," and kind of getting people more retained that way. Another thing here is around schedule. Schedule is an interesting one. I think schedule can be very good, or like I like having a predictable schedule. I think that that's a very important thing of like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, and we're like going through it and having that kind of piece of the puzzle. And then also keeping y'all engaged through content, right? And content's a big thing. And then another part of the schedule piece that I think has been important, and it's one of the other things of why I make the Q&A on Thursdays. I make that exclusive, is because I want y'all to stay on schedule too. I don't want y'all to just be like, oh, I'm just going to not do the homework, or like, oh, I'm just going to do the homework on the last minute. And it's like, no, I want to incentivize y'all to like do the homework like on time, so that it feels like you don't have to cram, and that like you retain it better, and like so that you can have more retention, like, because that is the goal here. I'm trying to make you guys better data engineers. So that's kind of the idea behind the retention part of this funnel. It's a very important piece of the funnel. I think it's one of the most overlooked pieces. This is the piece where you go from, okay, you acquired a customer to you delighted a customer. And customer delight is one of the most important parts of building a successful product. That is, I think that's like a Jeff Bezos quote or something like that. So we have, that's essentially the retention part of the funnel. Then we have the last piece here. We have where we go from engagement to referral and testimonial. So there's a couple things here, I think, of like how do you do that, all right? Where it's like you have someone who's engaged, you have someone who is doing the effort, they're doing the job, they're doing the homework, right? They're doing all the things, they're doing what they're supposed to do, right? And they're doing the program. Well, like, to really have someone go from engaged to testimonial or engaged to referral is you need to impact their life in a way, more than just giving them knowledge. You need to like really shift them in some way, like giving them a network, giving them a mentor, giving them. That's one of the big things that why I added the mentorship program into the bootcamp, is because I know that that is going to be at least as valuable as this bootcamp is right now, because one-on-one mentorship is incredibly valuable, especially with the talented people that you're going to be paired up with. So that is something to really think about. And because one of my goals is like, I am not here to teach you data engineering. I'm here to make you a data engineer. And those are different, right? Those are like, because one of them is like, oh, cool, that's nice. It's like reading it from a book, right? And the other one is like, no, I'm actually doing it. I'm actually doing it. I'm writing the SQL. I'm writing the pipelines. I have the job. I'm making the money, right? And that's like a very, those are different, very different. And some other things that you want to think about here when you're converting from engaged to testimonial is you also want to be thinking about LTV, like the lifetime value of that testimonial, of like, okay, this person like loves the content and like is all about it, and it's like, how much value am I going to get from that, like myself, and how does that kind of perpetuate into the business? And that's one of the things that I think is important to recognize when you are if you're working in a high margin business like what I'm working in, like is like, okay, how much am I investing back into my students and stuff like that? Because then it's like, okay, is that like, because the way I look at it, like long term, like the mentorship program, I actually look at, yeah, I know I'm investing some money into that, but like I actually think I'm gonna get paid back. So like I'll make money from it. Actually, I'm gonna make money from it. So, and like it'll be awesome. And so, and because one of the big things I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to build a community. I'm trying to build a kind of an apparatus of a way to get people to learn the skills, learn what they need to learn, and then get mentors who can get them to the next level. Because you need mentors who can then kind of, because obviously I'm speaking to like 50 of you right now. And I'm personally, I don't think I would be a good mentor for all of you. There's going to be some of you who like, you disagree with how I see the world. And that's totally okay. And like, but that means that like my career advice might not stick with you as well as someone who is a little bit more personalized to you. And that's actually what I'm going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is I'm going to be adding a personalized mentorship kind of intake form where there'll be, so like just how we did group matching based on like time zone and stuff like that, we're going to have do mentorship matching as well. And that will be another thing that will be kind of added into this program as we go forward here. So anyways, that is the next piece of the puzzle, is to get people to go all the way down the funnel. And then because then they become your brand champions, and then you don't have to market anymore. Because at that point you have so many people that love what you do, and they have such a profound appreciation for what you're doing and for what you did in their life that the boot camp or whatever thing you're making sells itself at that point. Because you have word of mouth, and you have that person tells their friends, and that person tells their friends. I'm already seeing that. I know y'all are telling your friends, because like I'm not doing any marketing right now, and I'm still selling self-paced courses. I'm still selling like a couple self-paced courses a day. And so like I know y'all are doing it right now even, right? So thank you for marketing for me. I appreciate it a lot. So anyways, that is the funnel. And one of the things I'm trying to talk about here with funnel stuff is, you'll notice that like a lot of what I talked about there is there's metrics. Every single one of those steps has a metric that you can measure, right? And just like what I was talking about before, where it's like, if we go all the way back to impressions, like, okay, or go back to this slide here, right? So we have the top of the funnel here of impressions, and like how many people actually make it down to this bottom one, right? It goes from like millions to like tens, and that's like a steep drop off. But then that's how you find your tribe, and you find your people, and you find the people who really really care about what you're doing. So anyways, that's kind of like when you're thinking about how to be a product manager, this is the kind of stuff that you should be thinking about as a data engineer as well. Because one of the things is like, if you're doing product analytics and you're a data engineer, you should be able, whatever metric you're coming up with, you should be able to come up with a cohesive story of like, where in this funnel does that metric play, right? I'll just give a couple examples here real quick. So for example, I worked in notifications at Facebook. So notifications is part of the retention step, right? Because that's how you bring people back. That's how you get people engaged. And that's how you get people to really keep using your product, right? Another one that I worked on at Facebook was friending. So friending is going to be also in the retention step, right? Because the more friends you have on Facebook, the more likely it is that you come back. So another area I worked on was NPX, which was new user experience. New user experience was actually more in this like signups and email acquisition, because that was a lot around like measuring the effectiveness of ads. But then it was like, it kind of bled between the two. It was between the email acquisition and the engaged retained, because Facebook conveniently doesn't have this purchase step because it's free. Right, so they go immediately from sign up to a retention problem, and they have a purchase step on the other side, right, on the ads side. So, and that's a great example of like, for them, it's like when an advertiser purchases an ad, that's going to be the middle of this, right? And that's where Facebook is a crazy product, because of the fact that they actually have two funnels, right? They have a funnel for users and a funnel for advertisers, and they have to deal with both of them, and they have like this kind of like two-sided thing. So one of the things I like about this bootcamp is that it's just one funnel, right? Because the other side is just me. I've thought about it in the future of like how I might want to do this, where I have like a set of educators and a set of students, and like kind of essentially taking kind of the platformized like Facebook approach to things. But right now it's me. So, anyways, you can see that like if you're a data engineer and you're creating metrics for product analytics, if it doesn't fit in this funnel anywhere, then it's most likely a waste of time. That's like straight up like that's my perspective, right? Is like if you're not like building something that fits into this funnel, it's probably a waste of time. There are some minor exceptions there, but then like you wouldn't be a product data engineer anymore. Like for example, if you're working on like infrastructure efficiency, where it's like you're measuring the efficiency of the infrastructure, or like how quickly or how fast things are made, or how much AWS dollars you're spending, that really doesn't fit into the funnel because it's not really a part of the user experience. It is in the fact that it raises, essentially what it does is it raises the cost to acquire a customer, like the CTA, cost to acquire. I think that's also call to action, but it's kind of both. So in that case, it would impact the signups, right? Because you would have kind of a cost to acquire that customer, and then that would be the metric that the additional infrastructure cost would then impact in this funnel. So that's a big thing to remember. Think about everything that you do in product analytics. Always be thinking about funnels, because if you're thinking about these funnels, you're going to impact the business way more, and then it will also help you put your work into context and help you build more robust data models that can help illustrate this funnel and illustrate this user journey in a more salient and effective way. So yeah, product analytics is tough, but like if you think about it as a funnel, it's a little bit easier. Okay, one other one is like how to think like a product manager. There's really only one question that you really want to be thinking about here as a data engineer. There's more in the product management space than this, but at every step of the funnel, thinking about what is causing pain, what is sparking joy. And if you can think about that, of like what is causing pain and what is sparking joy through every step of your user journey, and you try to optimize for joy and minimize pain, then you will be a lot more effective product manager. And I'm going to go over some more examples like within the bootcamp. I know this like presentation feels kind of meta, where I'm giving a presentation about the bootcamp in the bootcamp, but I hope y'all are getting some value out of this. So let's talk about some examples here from the bootcamp. So from that top level, right? So I'm talking about impressions, or maybe I'm talking about the prospective student. So one of the things that sparked joy in some of y'all was my content on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram about data engineering. And y'all probably were like, wow, I'm learning a lot. I think this guy knows his stuff. I think I can trust him with with teaching me. And that was a big thing that y'all did. And some of y'all even took it a step further, and you wanted deeper knowledge from me, and you signed up for my newsletter at some point in the last 2 months. And that's where I now have your email, and I was able to connect with you on a deeper, more personal level. So these are examples for me of things that I did right, that sparked joy, that brought customers to me, that were a big part of the user journey, that helped me build a bigger and more successful bootcamp. So then you have the new student. So when you paid your $1,000 or whatever, your $1,000-ish dollars, one of the things that people got was you got immediate access to all of the videos. You could easily look at, I mean, there was, I started at the beginning of the bootcamp, I think there was 10. I had all the first 2 weeks of data modeling from V1 and all the interview presentations that I did. And so you got immediate access to that content, and that was something that probably sparked joy in a lot of you, because you're like, wow, I got my money's worth. And there were, on the other side, was the hiccups around getting y'all added to the GitHub and getting y'all added to the deeper level of the content and getting you on Discord, and that stuff not being automated and that being like a very manual, painful process. That was something that did not spark joy. I don't know, I'm sure y'all have seen that meme of that like Asian lady who's like, this sparks joy. This does not spark joy. You know what I'm talking about? Like I always, like when I'm in my product manager like headspace, that Asian lady is like in my head the entire time. I needed to have like I was trying. I should have put that meme in here. That's oh man, that's gonna be in the next in V3. That is definitely gonna be in this presentation. So you think of like, okay, I'm thinking about the new student. This is one thing that sparked joy and one thing that sparked pain. Okay, what about engaged students? So I think another thing that sparked joy was getting everyone into groups so that you could have a kind of a group of people that you felt were going through the same trials and tribulations as you, and so you could feel less alone. And then also, you feel happy when you're going to be matched with a mentor because you feel like this whole boot camp was worth it because you're like, wow, I can't believe I listened to Zach talk for 60 hours. That's a lot of Zach. And now I get to have a mentor who's going to help me maybe get a referral to places or learn about interview skills or whatever things you want to learn from that mentor. You can get that from them. And I think a place that I messed up in for the engaged students, which is going to be most of you, is I think this bootcamp has been a lot. I've learned. I mean, this bootcamp has even been a lot for myself, like in coming up with the content and talking with you all every day. And one of the things I've learned is that, like, I think in the next bootcamp, I will scale it back just a little bit. I think that I will not do quite as many lectures. It will be, I think, still 6 weeks, but I'm going to condense some of these lectures and compact them down and kind of focus more a little bit deeper on quality and not quite as much on quantity, because I think that will help y'all feel less overwhelmed from the intensity of the bootcamp. But on the flip side, I appreciate y'all showing up and coming to all of these lectures, because I think that is also, it shows that you can do hard things. And I really do appreciate your engagement here. So that's kind of when I was thinking about the pain and joy of my bootcamp students. That's a big thing I was thinking about. And then on the last one, it's like, okay, I think for the referral and testimonial, I think it's when one of my students lands a better job from the skills they learned here, they're going to be very happy. They're going to be very grateful. They're going to freaking tell all their friends, and they're going to like love it. And that's going to be like the big part of this user journey, because I'm trying to build a sustainable business here where like I change lives every 6 weeks, or not every 6 weeks, but a couple times a year for 6 weeks I change lives, right? And I can get people to like really level up and get inspired by how they can kind of build things. But so the idea here is, you can see one of the things, the skill set here is I'm a data engineer, right? I'm not a product manager. I have never been a product manager. That's not my cup of tea. Most of this skill set, like where I learned this skill set, is by building startups and failing. Where I learned this from like building the Magic the Gathering app and from building Art Lineup and all these other startups that I created and failed at. And I learned a lot about like customers and the customer journey and joy and sadness and all that stuff from that angle. And you do want to, like, these are both important. Like, you do want to like have this strategy. So I just gave you my strategy of like how I'm thinking about the bootcamp and how I've been thinking about how I've been a product manager throughout this bootcamp journey, and not just because I could have just been a lecturer, right? And been like, okay, this is what you bought, thanks, bye, right? And been like kind of thinking about it from that angle of like, okay, I'll give them exactly what they asked for, and that's it, and not try to delight anybody. And I don't know, that's not the way to go, though. That's not how you build a legacy. But that's like kind of like, that's sort of being a product manager, though, and like, or not necessarily being a product manager, but like thinking about things like a product manager can make your data engineering skill set a lot better, because now each one of these things, every single one of these things is a metric, right? Where it's like here, it's like, okay, like one of these metrics is like, okay, how many people are converting from LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram, right? And how many people are signing up to my newsletter? Easy metrics to track, right? Okay, here is like, okay, how many people are buying the bootcamp and then watching a video immediately, right? And then also, how many people are buying the bootcamp and then messaging me about not having access to GitHub, right, within a day or X number of days or whatever, right? Those are two metrics, easy to track, right? Here, okay, how many people are doing the group work, right? That's another metric that we can easily track. Okay, how many people are actually showing up to the mentorship sessions? That is something that I am tracking. I'm going to have all my mentors track. And then also, how many people are dropping out of the bootcamp? That was something I actually had an initial indicator that the bootcamp might be too intense in week 2 when I had that refund deadline, and I think like about 8 people dropped out, and so then that was I was like, wow, this is going to be a lot. Metric, right? Here, how many people land a job and change their lives? Another metric, because I know if they land a better job, they're going to tell me about it, and I'll have that metric. Obviously, that will be that'd be a crazy data pipeline, right? Where it's like I have it like parse all my DMs, and it's like an LLM model to see like, oh, this person got a new job because of the boot camp, and then it like adds a row, right? That would be crazy. That'd be so crazy. But anyways, metrics, definitions, funnels, thinking about things like a product manager. These are how you build beautiful, amazing products, and this is how you make a business better. Right? Or make a business from nothing. That's what I did. I mean, I made this business from nothing. And like, I know that this business is going to be wildly successful. So, and a big part of that is thinking about each step of the user journey and how they are feeling. Think about emotions, empathy. It's important stuff. Okay. So, we're almost out of time here. At least like this is the last slide. This is what we're gonna do for the homework this week. Is you're gonna pick a product that you love using, whether that be like LinkedIn, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. So I want you to do that. I want you to describe the user journey of that product from when you signed up. Like, what about the product when you signed up were things that you liked? And like, why did you sign up initially? And then also, why are you coming back? Why are you staying engaged? And also, if you spend money, like why? Like what are the things that cause you to spend more money? Like on that product? Like I want you to talk just in detail about that. I expect like a couple paragraphs. This is not like a small amount of work here. And then the last step of the homework for this week is I want you to then describe 3 experiments you would like to run on this product to see if it would improve the experience. So, and this is going to be, you're going to detail out the allocation of each test cell and the different conditions you're testing. Like, for example, I'm going to do 50% test, 50% control, and I want to change this aspect of it or this aspect of it. And try to be creative here. Don't just be like, I want to make the button red or blue. Not like the basic examples I was giving in the labs, but like really try to put on your product manager hat there and think about like, oh, this is what I'm going to do differently, or I'm going to do, I want to change this aspect of it, or like I've always been annoyed by this feature and I want to change it in this way. And then the last thing is like, I want a hypothesis from each experiment about like what you think would change or which metrics you think would change, like the leading and lagging metrics. And just assume that you have access to every metric in the world because you're probably going to pick a product that has all of the metrics in the world anyways. So, and just think about like which metrics you think are going to change, like either drop or raise. And really think about like potentially what could go wrong in the experiment as well. So that's going to be the homework for this week.
Congrats on getting to the end of the day 2 lecture. I'm so happy that you're taking this time to invest in your knowledge and getting better at data. See you at the next one.